Rachel startled when the incessant ringing of her phone shattered the silence at 1 a.m. The bedroom was in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the faint yellow glow of the nightstand lamp projecting against the wall. She opened her eyes with difficulty and saw Alexander turned away from her. His deep, irregular breathing indicated he was fast asleep. Rachel hesitated for a moment before reaching for the phone to silence the annoying sound. The screen displayed an unknown number with no caller ID. Who could be calling at this hour? She thought. Still, she pressed the answer button, her voice raspy with sleep. Hello? Sleeping well, Rachel? Responded a soft female voice, but with an edge as cold and sharp as a razor. I suppose so, because you still don't know where your husband really is. Rachel sat up abruptly, her heart pounding at 1,000 miles an hour. Who is this? She whispered, careful not to wake Alexander. There was a silence of a few seconds, followed by a mocking laugh. I'm Chloe, the woman expecting Alexander's child. Or would you prefer I ask him to come home right now to confirm it for you? Each word was like a direct stab to her mind. She was left breathless, unable to articulate a sound. The initial shock left her trembling. She turned and gently shook Alexander's shoulder. Alexander, wake up. Someone called saying she's pregnant with your child. Alexander frowned, opening his eyes with difficulty. He grabbed the phone, but the other person had already hung up. What kind of joke is this at this hour? He grunted. Stop imagining things, Rachel. Go to sleep. I have to go to the office early tomorrow. With that, he handed the phone back to her and rolled over, ignoring her completely, while she remained paralyzed. In the stillness of the night, Rachel felt completely alone beside her husband, as if he were a perfect stranger. She remained seated, clutching the phone with one hand and bringing the other to her chest, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her head. Alexander had a mistress, and on top of that, she was pregnant. It was impossible. During all their years of love, she had never suspected him, and now he didn't even bother to deny it. He simply got irritated and dismissed it as nonsense. Rachel forced herself to lie down and covered herself with the duvet, but she knew she wouldn't get a wink of sleep that night. The next morning, Rachel woke up exhausted from the lack of sleep. Coming down the stairs, she saw Eleanor directing a team of movers in the guest suite. The housekeeper was hurriedly carrying out armfuls of Rachel's stored belongings. Eleanor stood with her arms crossed, inspecting a delivery of high-end maternity furniture. "Mother, what is going on?" Rachel asked. Eleanor didn't even turn around. "I'm having the guest wing redecorated for Chloe. She needs 24-hour monitoring for the baby, and I don't trust her alone in that apartment of hers." In that instant, Rachel understood. A sharp pain shot through her chest. She swallowed hard, feeling her eyes sting. "Who is Chloe?" she asked, though she already intuited the answer. Eleanor looked her up and down with disdain. "And you're asking me? Well, who do you think? The woman carrying my grandson in her womb. This family needs an heir. If you can't give us one, you can stay. But don't make that face. If you're smart, you'll treat her well. Don't cause her stress and affect the baby." She spoke as if she were scolding her, not caring in the slightest about her daughter-in-law's pale face. Rachel stood stone still, a buzzing in her ears. This was the home where she had deposited all her love, and she received not an apology, nor a hint of shame, only brazen cruelty. She hadn't yet recovered when Alexander came down the stairs. He passed by her without looking directly at her and said dryly, "Mom has already explained it to you. Don't make a scene. Chloe is about to arrive, and she is very tired. She needs to rest." Then he headed straight for the door as if everything that had just happened was completely normal. Rachel followed her husband's back with her gaze, while everything around her seemed to crumble. The years of love, the efforts to maintain happiness, now shattered by a few cold, dry sentences. She remained planted there until the housekeeper passed by her to place things in the room. The smell of air freshener mixed with the bitterness rising in her throat. She spent the entire morning like a wandering soul. It wasn't until noon that she reluctantly went down to the kitchen to prepare lunch. That day, 4 people ate. Dinner was a suffocating affair. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, signaling the housekeeper to serve Chloe the prime cut of steak first. Eat up, dear. You're eating for two now. Rachel picked at her salad, ignored by everyone. Eleanor put down her wine glass and looked sharply at Rachel. Let's be adults about this, Rachel. Let's be pragmatic, Rachel. The family trust is explicit about the succession plan. Alexander needs a legacy to secure his standing in the foundation, not a roommate. You haven't secured the family line, and Alexander has moved on. Stop clinging to a dead marriage. Sign the papers, take the settlement, and let us move forward with Chloe, who is actually securing this family's future. If you're so capable, have a child now. If not, sign the papers and leave us in peace. Rachel remained silent, no screams, no tears. She put down her silverware, stood up, and went to her room. Behind her back, she heard Chloe's mocking laugh. A whirlwind of emotions boiled in her heart, pain, rage, but above all, a sense of betrayal that soaked her to the bone. 7 years of living together in which she had learned to be patient, to endure just for family peace. It turned out her patience had only made them despise her even more. That night, Rachel didn't sleep in the master bedroom. She went to the home office, locked the door, and sat silently in the chair, staring at the safe while memories flooded her. When she married Alexander, she used all the money her mother had left her to invest in his tech startup, entrusting him with the position of CEO. Back then, he was full of ambition. She thought that with love and sacrifice, their future would be bright. Who would have said that as the company consolidated, Alexander would become more skilled at hiding his own ambitions, forgetting who had supported him from the shadows? Rachel opened the safe and took out several folders of documents. She turned the pages and clearly saw her name in the Articles of Incorporation as a founding partner and the deed to a large lake house in the Adirondacks. For years, Eleanor and Alexander had assumed everything belonged to them because she had never boasted about it, nor demanded to be listed as a co-owner. In fact, right after the wedding, she ceded all executive power to him, keeping only the legal documents in her name. She let out a dry laugh. In the quiet of the night, the ticking of the wall clock marked every minute. She remembered Chloe's biting words. "What do you have now?" she asked herself. "What do I have? Not much, but enough to make her and her mother-in-law think twice. The submissive wife of yesterday had disappeared. She had no other choice but to get up and take the reins of what was hers. She put away the folders and closed the safe carefully. At that moment, her eyes shone with an unusual calm. If Alexander had handed her the divorce papers, if her mother-in-law had openly brought her son's mistress home, forcing her to accept it, then what she had to do now was use her strengths to unmask all their dirty plans. Perhaps for a long time, she had sensed the day would come when she would have to fight against the man she once loved with all her heart. It would hurt, but a clean cut was necessary. That night, Rachel didn't sleep a minute. She waited for dawn, hoping a new day would confirm that it wasn't all a nightmare. When the first rays of light filtered through the curtains, she heard noises downstairs. It seemed Eleanor was talking on the phone with Chloe, giving her instructions to buy more things for the baby. Her voice sounded cheerful, as if Rachel had never existed. A bitter smile formed on her face as she stretched and left the office, preparing for a new day. In her mind, a plan began to take shape. She wouldn't leave immediately. First, she would make this house, which had treated her like a stranger, understand her true position. Rachel dressed in a business suit, pulled her hair back, and applied a touch of pink lipstick. She looked in the mirror at a serene face with no trace of tears. She told herself, "No one has the right to destroy my life unless I allow it." She went down the stairs. Breakfast was served, but Alexander had already left. Chloe hadn't arrived yet, and Eleanor was sitting drinking tea. Her gaze passed over Rachel with disdain, without a greeting, without a word for her daughter-in-law. Rachel just smiled slightly and walked out the door. She drove to her office, the place where in a few days she would take the first steps to recover everything that had been taken from her. On the way, she stopped the car next to a coffee shop. She turned off the engine and sat for a few minutes with her heart still heavy, but for the first time, she didn't cry. She grabbed her phone and searched her contacts for Mark, a lawyer friend she had met a couple of times. She sent him a text message. I need to transfer some stock voting rights urgently. Can we meet today? After sending the message, she leaned back in the seat, thoughtful. There was no humanity left in that house, so she had no reason to feel nostalgia either. Outside, the traffic began to intensify. The sun shone on the streets of New York. A new day was beginning, and for Rachel, so was a war. Rachel entered the office building with a serene expression. Some colleagues greeted her, and she nodded in response. No one noticed that under that light layer of makeup was a woman fighting against the storm of her marriage. She maintained her usual professionalism, organized and efficient. She had to sign some documents and process payroll as if nothing had changed, but inside, Rachel was already secretly preparing her plan. She set up a meeting with Mark, the lawyer friend who had helped her with legal procedures years ago. As soon as she finished an internal meeting, she grabbed her purse, left the company, and drove to a small coffee shop in the corner of a shopping center. Mark was waiting for her at a corner table where there were fewer people. He greeted her with a smile, but seeing Rachel's expression, his faded. "You look tense," Mark said. "What is so urgent?" Rachel took a deep breath, sat down, and took a sheaf of documents from her purse. "I want to assign the power of attorney for my shares in the company to a representative so Alexander can't track them. To be more precise, I need to strip him of executive power unexpectedly." Mark frowned. "I recall Alexander founded this company." Rachel shook her head. "Actually, the initial capital came from the Aurora Group. Alexander always assumed Aurora was just a faceless venture capital firm managed by my mother's estate lawyers. He never bothered to read the operating agreement. If he had, he would have known that I am the sole beneficiary and managing member of Aurora. I control 65% of the voting stock through that shell company. He works for me, Mark. He just doesn't know it yet. Now I want to transfer those shares so another person appears as the holder." Mark looked at her with surprise in his eyes. "So, all this time, you've been financing Alexander while he only held the title of CEO?" Rachel smiled bitterly. "Yes, until now I hadn't revealed myself because I wanted my husband to feel comfortable in business so he wouldn't feel insecure if his wife was more capable. Who would have said he would betray me by bringing his pregnant mistress home?" Mark placed his hand on the documents. His voice became more serious. "Then, what you want is to call a board meeting and have the new representative temporarily suspend Alexander." Rachel nodded. "I want to turn the tables. I don't need to cause a scandal, just deal a fatal blow to the job he takes so much pride in. After that, I'll deal with the rest of the assets." Mark understood. He agreed to organize everything. "I know someone trustworthy. She has represented clients in many confidential deals. You can rest easy." Rachel looked out the window at the hustle and bustle of the people. After a moment of silence, she said quietly, "You know, I once loved Alexander so much I thought he was my everything. Now I realize my terrible mistake, but just because I was wrong, am I going to keep letting them trample me?" Mark consoled her. "You've done the right thing. A man who doesn't respect his wife and allows his mother to kick her out to welcome his mistress doesn't deserve you suffering anymore for him." Rachel closed her eyes and nodded slightly. "I have to get back to work. Please, get it moving as soon as possible." She left the coffee shop feeling a little lighter. The first steps of her plan were in motion. She knew the storm was coming, but she was prepared. That night she drove back home. The gate was open and the living room lights were on. Upon entering, she found Chloe lying on the sofa with her feet up, changing channels with the remote while eating fruit. Seeing Rachel, she looked at her sideways. "You're back late, aren't you? You didn't plan on making dinner for everyone? Eleanor told me you had to take care of me, that a pregnant woman needs to eat at regular hours." Rachel pressed her lips together and didn't answer. She took off her shoes intending to go up to her room, but Chloe added, "Don't worry, Eleanor also told me not to ask you to cook. She was afraid you'd feel bad about not having children and having to serve someone who does." Rachel turned and looked her up and down without showing any emotion. She went up the stairs. From the kitchen, Eleanor called her. "Rachel, come down here. I want to speak with you." She stopped and went down. She saw her mother-in-law washing her hands while saying, "Tomorrow Chloe has an appointment with the OB/GYN. Alexander is busy with a meeting, so you will take her. You will handle all the expenses. Everything has to be perfect. Understood, Rachel? She smiled bitterly. Your mom can take her. I don't have time. Eleanor turned sharply, glaring at her. Are you talking back to me? I told you to take Chloe, and you dare to reply? Her voice was a growl. Without bothering to argue, Rachel turned around and went up the stairs, leaving her mother-in-law's shouts behind. She entered her room and closed the door, her chest heaving. If it had been before, she would have accepted, felt humiliated, and cried, but now she had no intention of serving anyone. She remembered the divorce agreement she kept in a drawer. It seemed Alexander was determined to kick her out so Chloe could take her place. They were enjoying their temporary victory. Better that way. She would let them enjoy it, until karma struck back. The next morning, Rachel got up early and drove to the company. She dressed elegantly, and her face was fresh, as if the previous day's crisis had never existed. At home, Eleanor was probably preparing a broth for Chloe, and Alexander had left even earlier. He had told his mother he had an important meeting and couldn't take Chloe to the doctor's appointment. The internal meeting at the company also took place. Alexander presided over it as CEO. Rachel entered as the head of finance, a position she had held in the background until now, without anyone knowing she was actually the majority shareholder. Alexander spoke nonstop about his expansion plans and capital raising. Meanwhile, Rachel glanced at her notebook in silence with a serene gaze. She observed every face in the room, wondering, if they knew I owned 65% of the shares, would they still obey Alexander? After the meeting ended, Alexander received Chloe in the company lobby. He introduced her openly to some as his future wife who was expecting his child. Rachel, from a distance, just smiled with disdain. She had never seen Alexander's true face so clearly. He took her to his private office and left her sitting there while he signed some documents. It was a hurtful scene, but she no longer cared to feel jealous. All of that only propelled her to accelerate her plan. That evening, upon leaving the company, Rachel went directly to a private hospital. That evening, Rachel met with a private investigator she had hired days ago. They sat in a secluded booth at a diner. You were right to be suspicious, the investigator said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. I tracked her movements and pulled her credit card receipts, the supplementary card Alexander gave her. He pointed to a specific charge. This clinic isn't for prenatal care, Rachel. It specializes in elective terminations. She went there 3 weeks ago. She isn't pregnant anymore. She's playing them for cash. Finally, the record showed that Chloe had come there for a consultation on pregnancy termination. The fetus was 6 weeks old, and the family had not been informed. Rachel asked for a copy of the consultation report, paid all the necessary fees, and asked the doctor for confidentiality. With the papers in hand, Rachel went out to the parking lot under the yellow light of the street lamps. She had already suspected that Chloe was faking the pregnancy, or that, even having one, she had secretly terminated it. Now she had the proof. She let out a breath of cold air. She didn't need to humiliate Chloe by making it public. She just had to wait for the right moment for Alexander and Eleanor to discover the fake pregnancy themselves. That night, arriving home, she found Chloe sitting in the living room looking at her with hostility. Alexander hadn't returned, and Eleanor had gone to bed early. Chloe lifted her chin. Have you arranged your things? Did you sign the papers? I don't want the atmosphere in the house to be tense. Rachel took a quick look at her abdomen. The loose dress made it difficult to distinguish if it was real or fake. She didn't answer. She simply smiled and went up the stairs. They thought she would sign the papers and leave in silence. No, if she had to leave, she would do it with her head held high, and the gift she would leave them would be the loss of everything they thought they deserved. The next morning, Alexander went to work beaming, acting as if nothing worrisome was happening. Eleanor ordered the housekeeper to take nutritious food up to Chloe, constantly reminding her of the topic of the grandson, and ordered Rachel to do the laundry and clean the house. Rachel simply said yes, and left the house in silence. In her mind, she had something more important: coordinating with Mark to complete the transfer of power of her shares. The company was about to call an extraordinary board meeting. As soon as the legal documents were presented, Alexander would be in for a surprise. In her office, Rachel meticulously reviewed every word of the proxy contract. She signed, sealed, and sent it to Mark. Once done, she leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and exhaled. Every move she made now was like tightening the noose around Alexander. She didn't regret it, although she felt a pang of bitterness, because he was the man she had once trusted. But at this point, it was clear she had to stay lucid. During the lunch break, she ate something quick in the office and then called a trusted financial partner. "Help me review the expenses approved by Alexander. Lately, the company has had some unusual expenditures." The partner responded concisely, "Agreed. I'll send you an email with the details. Relax." Rachel knew perfectly well that Alexander had used his position as CEO to register many ambiguous expenses. This would be what would tie his hands and feet in the next meeting, added to his appointment of Chloe as an assistant without following the process, and the traces of financial irregularities he had carelessly left while entangled in his affair. Rachel wasn't inventing anything. She was just ready to bring it all to light. After work, Rachel left the building with her usual serene countenance. Arriving home, she heard Chloe's laughter in the living room and Eleanor's voice defending the mistress, a cheerful atmosphere, as if they lived in absolute bliss. Anyone seeing the scene would think Chloe was the wife and Rachel, a simple tenant. She went up to her room in silence, closed the door, and opened her laptop. The scanned image of Chloe's medical record clearly showed the date of the consultation and the reason: counseling for pregnancy termination. Rachel saved the file carefully, in no hurry to reveal it. Let her enjoy a little longer, she thought. At the right moment, everything would come to light. She knew that in life, haste is usually counterproductive. They had set up a theater, and she didn't mind acting with them, but in the role of the counteroffensive waiting for her moment. The outside world bustled, while the world inside that house rotted day by day. Eleanor and her son waited excitedly for the grandson, unaware of the terrible secret hidden in Chloe's womb. Alexander trusted blindly that Chloe was carrying his son, and Rachel, between pain and lucidity, was determined to use reason to recover everything. At night, the streetlight filtered through the curtains, and a cold breeze slipped in gently. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed looking at the wooden floor, remembering her wedding day, the immaculate white dress. Alexander had promised her they would walk together until the end of happiness. The happiness he spoke of had now turned into a farce. She leaned against the wall, listening to her own breathing, first agitated, then slowly calming down. She didn't know what the future held for her. She only knew that in the present, she had much to do. Her love of 7 years had rotted, but she wouldn't lose herself. Unconsciously, she clenched her fists. The tears no longer fell. Tomorrow she would continue going to the company, continue smiling, continue playing her role as a normal finance chief until the curtain fell, and it was Alexander and Eleanor who tasted the bitter flavor of defeat. Rachel remained there in silence until she fell asleep near dawn. Downstairs, Chloe and Eleanor were perhaps still laughing or already sleeping peacefully. But Rachel knew that once she had made a decision, no one could stop the day of her counterattack. She only needed to wait for the right moment for them to show all their arrogance, and then everything would collapse like a sandcastle swept away by a furious wave. Alexander entered the boardroom on the 12th floor with an air of confidence. He adjusted his tie, glanced around, feeling that everything was under control. It was an important board of directors meeting that he himself had organized with the hope that the shareholders would approve more funds to open a new branch. Since becoming CEO, Alexander had always felt he was the one truly holding the reins. He trusted that the majority of shareholders would accept his proposals because until now, no one had opposed him. Rachel had arrived early and was sitting in the row designated for department heads, observing in silence. She knew she was the majority shareholder, but the power of her shares had already been transferred to another representative. From that moment on, she would continue playing her role as a normal employee without revealing anything. Beside her, some colleagues whispered, "I bet Boss Alexander announces a new strategy today. Rumor has it the company is going to make a huge investment." Rachel said nothing, only smiled slightly, thinking, is he about to face the worst nightmare of his life? The time arrived. The shareholders arrived, all more formal and serious than usual. Alexander declared with a firm voice the purpose of the meeting: to report on the financial situation and request approval for the expansion plan. He projected several slides and began to speak eloquently about growth figures and profit margins. At first glance, the report seemed impeccable, and some nodded with satisfaction. However, other shareholders showed skepticism on their faces, exchanging glances. Alexander, still confident, thought they were considering a large investment. It was then that the door to the room opened, and an unknown woman dressed in a black suit entered. All eyes turned to her. She left her briefcase on the table, and with a deliberate but firm voice introduced herself as Jessica, the new legal representative of the founding shareholder. There was a general murmur, since until now the principal shareholder had not revealed themselves and had only delegated certain functions to Alexander. Rachel watched Alexander's face in silence, noting his momentary confusion. Jessica began her intervention, presenting a series of documents and evidence demonstrating numerous irregular expenses in the company. The invoices and receipts were clearly shown on the screen. With each document presented, Alexander's face reddened a little more. Jessica pointed directly at the figures, explaining that proper control procedures had not been followed and that they put investment funds at risk. Furthermore, she revealed that Alexander had hired a relative, specifically Chloe, a person without the proper qualifications, for the position of special assistant. This was considered a violation of internal rules, and many surprised shareholders began reviewing the papers. Alexander tried to defend himself. Those expenses aren't that big. It was an accounting oversight. I only signed the confirmation, and I hired Chloe because she has talent. Jessica smiled slightly and changed the slide to show the records of Chloe's disproportionate salary and bonuses alongside her mediocre resume. The murmur in the room grew. The atmosphere became tense. Alexander looked around for some of his allies, expecting support, but everyone avoided eye contact. Jessica continued with a calm voice. At the request of the majority shareholder, we request the temporary suspension of Mr. Alexander from the position of CEO to carry out an internal audit. This is a necessary measure to guarantee transparency. She left the proposal on the table. Everyone remained silent, waiting to see who dared to oppose. Several of the other large shareholders nodded, showing their agreement. You could cut the air with a knife. Alexander stood petrified, unable to believe what he was hearing. He tried to give more explanations, but no one was paying attention to him anymore. Everyone knew the board held the power, and now the power was not on his side. Rachel, from her seat, maintained her calm. She saw Alexander's face turn pale and sweat bead on his forehead. He had never imagined a day like this. In his mind, the principal shareholder was just a distant investor who rarely intervened, and if they did, it was through him. He had forgotten that the person who really owned 65% of the shares was the wife he had underestimated for years. Now everything was a sudden nightmare dragging him into the abyss. At the end of the meeting, Alexander remained practically slumped in his chair, watching the shareholders leave one by one. The representative Jessica gathered her things and left quickly. Rachel stood up in silence without approaching him, greeted a few colleagues, and headed to the elevator. Alexander ran after her, but when he reached the lobby, Jessica was already in her car, and Rachel had deliberately blended into the crowd, disappearing around a corner. He only managed to see her silhouette fade away. That noon, Alexander couldn't eat a bite. He stayed dazed in his office, thinking about how to turn the situation around, but all the evidence was irrefutable. He couldn't solve it in a day. His mother, Eleanor, still hoped he would triumph in the company, never imagining this situation would leave him in shock. Alexander pressed his forehead, becoming furious as he remembered a detail. Chloe, the woman he had placed as an assistant, had received enormous benefits. Now the whole company saw it as proof of his abuse of power. Still, he didn't suspect her. In his mind, Chloe was carrying his child and would surely be suffering greatly if she knew the problems he faced. At sunset, Alexander returned home exhausted. Chloe was still on the sofa smiling and calling to him. "You're back. I was waiting for you." But Alexander barely looked at her without showing joy. Eleanor, who was serving tea in the kitchen, ran out upon hearing her son. "Why that face? Has something happened?" Alexander dropped his briefcase heavily onto a chair and turned off the TV Chloe was watching. "Mom, the company has suspended me. The shareholders have brought up all sorts of rules, accusing me of improper expenses and nepotism. Now I'm suspended." Eleanor froze. "Suspended? How is that possible? Wasn't your position as CEO secured?" Chloe approached Alexander nervously and whispered, "Honey, surely it's a misunderstanding. Explain it to them again." Alexander pushed her hand away, annoyed. "Explain what? Those who hold the shares decide. How am I going to fight against that?" In his anger, he shouted, "And to top it off, the documents about your salary and bonuses, they say they violate procedures. You see? You haven't done anything for me, only brought me more problems." Chloe stood stone still with eyes full of tears. Until now, she trusted that with the pregnancy he would pamper her, but now in his confusion, he didn't even pay attention to her. Eleanor was also surprised. She had fantasized that her son had power secured, and now he received a painful blow. At that moment, Rachel entered the door with a briefcase in her hand. She left it silently on the table, intending to go up to her room. Alexander saw her and felt incredibly uncomfortable because she was so calm, as if none of this had anything to do with her. Eleanor cleared her throat and called Rachel. "Hey, do you know anything about Alexander's suspension at the company? You work there too. Tell us if there is any misunderstanding." Rachel responded calmly. "I'm not aware of the details. Ask the CEO." Hearing those words, Alexander felt as if a knife were being twisted in him because he no longer held that position. Chloe also forced a smile. Eleanor, seeing Rachel's attitude, got even angrier. "You can't help your husband with anything. Even in this situation, you remain so indifferent." Rachel shrugged, dodged them, and went up the stairs. She knew Alexander's situation perfectly well, but she had nothing to say. After all, this was just the beginning. Alexander would face an even worse situation when all his irregularities came to light. Although she had followed procedure, she couldn't deny she was the mastermind behind everything. She didn't regret it. If this family treated her like a stranger, she didn't have to cling on. She just wanted to teach them a lesson about contempt. At night, Alexander tossed and turned in bed. Chloe called him and sent him messages, but he didn't want to answer. She was in her room on the ground floor where the den used to be. Alexander had never imagined he would lose his position. That nightmare had come true, and he felt the ground sinking beneath his feet. Meanwhile, Rachel in her room upstairs looked at her laptop screen. She checked her email and saw that Jessica was informing her about the first steps of the audit. Everything was going according to plan. In a few days, they would issue an official internal statement about Alexander's suspension. For a moment, she thought about the man she had shared a bed with and felt a pang of pain, but she pushed it away. If he had led her to this situation, she had no reason to soften. The next morning, Chloe ran to the kitchen looking for Alexander, but he had already left. Eleanor complained about the loss of Alexander's position, the drop in income, and the need to continue feeding Chloe well. Rachel ate breakfast in silence, without saying a word. Chloe, hearing her mother-in-law's sighs, grew impatient, caressed her belly, and said with a pampered voice, "Surely in a few days everything will be fixed. Alexander is very capable. There's no reason for them to fire him." Rachel knew Chloe was flattering Eleanor, and smiled bitterly. Chloe didn't understand that Alexander had not only lost his position, but was about to be investigated for more serious matters, and she herself was a big stain on his record. For her, the pregnancy was still her lucky charm. Perhaps Chloe didn't imagine that the proof of her abortion was already in Rachel's hands. There was no need to wait long. A week later, the audit team began their work. Alexander was officially suspended, and at the same time, his salary was frozen. The whole company found out. Many were surprised, because Alexander had always boasted of having shareholder backing. Rumors about Chloe began to circulate. People wondered who that mistress was. She had just arrived at the company and already enjoyed a very high salary without being seen doing anything. In his despair, Alexander could only avoid people, fearing awkward questions. At home, the atmosphere between Eleanor and Chloe became even tenser. Chloe kept asking Alexander, "Shouldn't we hire a lawyer and sue?" Alexander shouted at her, "Sue them? With what money? The shareholders have the power, don't you understand?" Eleanor, seeing her son exhausted, tried to console him. "Relax. I'll think of how to get money. In the worst case, we'll sell the lake house upstate so you can pay your debts and get your position back. We can't go on like this." Eleanor's words casually reached Rachel's ears. She listened from the porch and smiled with disdain. They thought the lake house belonged to Alexander, but in reality, it was exclusively hers. If they dared to try and sell it, they would be in for a good surprise. At the end of the day, while everyone was in a bad mood, Chloe prepared a small dinner, cooking some dishes in hopes of improving the family atmosphere. However, the dinner was very forced. Neither Alexander nor Eleanor felt like eating. Chloe tried to serve them food, smiling sweetly. "Alexander, eat something. You are very stressed, and that can affect the baby." She even gave him a kiss on the cheek in front of Eleanor, feigning concern. Rachel, sitting in a corner, watched the scene. She felt pity, not out of jealousy, but because she understood Chloe was performing a perfect play. Halfway through dinner, Chloe feigned nausea and ran to the bathroom. Eleanor, alarmed, asked the housekeeper to bring her a towel, while Alexander remained motionless with a lost gaze. The little compassion he had left for Chloe couldn't hide the worry about his declining career. Rachel cleared the plates without anyone asking her. Passing through the hallway, she heard Eleanor telling Chloe to be careful. "My grandson is growing. Don't exert yourself." Chloe, seeing Rachel, smiled smugly as if to say, "Even if you interfere, you won't achieve anything." Rachel didn't respond. She collected the dishes in silence and took them to the kitchen. In the kitchen, with its yellowed walls and under the neon light, she began to scrub. The water ran, and her heart felt empty. Some 7 years ago, she had happily taken care of every meal for her husband and mother-in-law. Now everything had become a suffocating burden. She wondered if things would have been different if she had given in immediately, signed the divorce, and left the house, but then she smiled bitterly. She would leave like this, but she would do it with the initiative so they would see that trampling on her wasn't so simple. Late at night, when Alexander was in his room and Chloe had also retired, Rachel grabbed her phone. Sitting by the window, looking into the darkness, she sent a brief message to her lawyer friend. "Everything is going according to plan. I'm waiting for the final piece regarding the estate." She put the phone away and looked towards the patio. Under the dim light, only the silhouettes of some neglected flower pots were visible. She knew that tomorrow Eleanor would likely call some real estate agents to sell the lake house, as it was the only way to get money to help Alexander. Of course, they couldn't imagine she was the legal owner. This place had become a stage. Eleanor believed herself the director, Alexander the main star, and Chloe the muse. But in reality, it was Rachel holding the script. She was in no hurry to play all her cards. She would wait for them to make a few more false steps. The deeper they went, the harder it would be to retreat, and when they realized, it would be too late. She held on to the window frame. The cold night wind whipped her face, messing up her hair. Her gaze hardened. At that moment, the beautiful memories of Alexander faded. She didn't need to cry anymore. The anger had consumed itself, leaving only a void and an iron determination. She told herself, every act of patience is a way of sharpening the knife for the day of the counterattack. She had kept silent for 7 years, more than enough time to prepare a painful fall for them. In the middle of the night, the phone vibrated. She saw a message from Jessica. She had gathered the evidence on Chloe, including notes from the international hospital. Rachel pressed her lips together and wrote, "Thanks, keep them. I will use them personally at the right time." Leaving the phone, her gaze fell on an old wedding photo with a broken corner of the frame. In the photo, Alexander smiled radiantly, and she snuggled shyly on his shoulder. Only a few years had passed, and everything had turned to mud. Downstairs, Chloe probably slept or messaged someone else. She kept thinking her fake pregnancy was an impregnable shield. Rachel turned off the light and plunged into darkness. This chapter of her life was about to reach its climax. In the silence, she could clearly hear her heartbeat steady, no longer agitated like before. After all, she had taken the place that corresponded to her. She just had to wait for the day to draw the curtain. Chloe was lying on the sofa with her legs crossed, watching an entertainment show when the doorbell rang. It was the mail carrier. "Certified mail for Mr. Alexander," he announced. Chloe, who was closer to the door, turned pale. She tried to intercept it. "I'll sign for him," she said quickly, reaching out. "Sorry, ma'am. Restricted delivery." "Must be the addressee," the carrier insisted. Alexander stepped out onto the porch, frowning. "What is this?" He signed the digital pad and took the thick envelope. It was from his health insurance company. "Strange," he muttered, tearing open the tab. "I didn't think we had any pending claims." He opened the envelope. It was the monthly statement for the Platinum Amex card he had given her. His eyes scanned the high-end purchases until they stopped on a charge from 3 weeks ago. October 14th, Eastside Women's Clinic, $650. He froze. He knew that clinic. It wasn't for prenatal massages. He pulled out his phone and Googled the merchant name. Services, reproductive health and elective termination. "You didn't go for a vitamin drip," Alexander whispered, his voice shaking. "You charged an abortion to my credit card 3 weeks ago." The silence in the driveway was suffocating. Alexander looked up, the paper shaking in his hand. October 14th. "That was the day you said you went for a prenatal vitamin drip. You said the baby was kicking." Chloe tried to snatch the paper, but he held it out of reach. "Alexander, wait. Insurance companies make mistakes all the time. It's a coding error." "A coding error?" Alexander's face turned a violent shade of red. He pointed to the patient responsibility column. "It says here the copay was paid on-site. You aborted my child and charged it to my insurance?" Patient name, Chloe. Date, almost a month ago. Asterisk. Alexander froze, his hands trembling, holding the paper. He looked at Chloe with fury. His voice choked. "What is this? When did you have an abortion?" Chloe, pale, tried to snatch the paper from him, but he held it tight. "I'm asking you again, why is there a document proving you went to a consultation to abort?" Chloe stammered. "I only went to get information. I didn't do it. I was afraid you'd get bored of me, but I'm still carrying our child." Eleanor, hearing the commotion, came out and snatched the paper from Alexander. She read it, and her face crumbled. "What have you done? Where's my grandson? You aborted him and dare to stay here living like a queen?" Chloe, terrified and crying her eyes out, pleaded, "I only went to the consultation, but in the end, I didn't do it. Believe me, please." Alexander lost his cool and shouted at her, "And what do you tell me about this report? The date is clear. That day you told me you were going for a checkup, and it turns out you went to find out how to abort. In the end, were you really pregnant or not?" Chloe collapsed, hugging Alexander's legs. "You have to believe me. It was just a moment of panic. I love you. I really wanted to have this child to tie you to me." Alexander pushed her leg away, looking at her with disgust. For the first time, he felt completely deceived. He remembered the times Chloe had gone to her checkups. He hadn't been able to accompany her due to work, and she always returned with verbal reports without any ultrasound. Eleanor, furious, shouted, "You have deceived us all, Alexander and me, my God. And I kicked Rachel out to bring you here. You are a viper." Chloe kept crying. "It wasn't my intention. I just thought the baby would make him take responsibility." Alexander let out a bitter laugh. "Take responsibility? Do you know that for that supposed child of yours, I cruelly kicked out my wife? My career is destroyed. Get out of my house right now." Chloe, terrified, begged him, kneeling in the patio, but Alexander turned his back on her. Eleanor insulted her. "Every minute you stay here is a humiliation to me." In the midst of the chaos, Rachel stopped her car outside the gate. From a distance, she witnessed Chloe, with a small suitcase and a desolate expression, stumbling out. She looked up and stared at Rachel. her eyes full of hatred and pleading, but Rachel simply stepped aside in silence to let her pass without wasting another word. This was the end Chloe deserved. After Chloe left, a deathly silence took over the house. Eleanor slumped into a chair, dejected. Alexander, without even changing his clothes, sat with a lost gaze, contemplating the papers scattered on the table. A few days ago, he believed Chloe was his salvation. Now he discovered that not only was she not pregnant, but she had planned to deceive him to trap him. Deep down, Alexander knew he was paying the price for his stupidity, but he couldn't swallow the bitter taste. Rachel entered the house, left her purse on the table, and looked around without showing emotion. Eleanor looked up and called her in a low voice. "Rachel, I was wrong." Her voice sounded broken, as if clinging to a last hope. Rachel didn't answer, poured herself a glass of water, and went directly up the stairs. Eleanor said nothing more. Perhaps she knew it was too late to apologize. Alexander followed his wife's figure with his gaze, but didn't dare to speak. He feared she would laugh with contempt, or worse, ignore him. Upstairs in her room, Rachel exhaled and looked for some documents in her email. She had just received a report on the results of that night's emergency board meeting. Alexander was officially suspended indefinitely and could face an investigation for irregular expenses. The company was appointing a new manager. He who once believed himself invincible now saw how a simple decision stripped him of everything, including his salary. Perhaps now he understood what it was to fall from the top. That night, Eleanor didn't cook. The housekeeper served some dishes, but no one felt like eating. Alexander wasn't hungry either. He locked himself in his room, smoking one cigarette after another. His clothes reeked of smoke. His mind was chaos. The image of Chloe crying at his feet and his mother's bitter words mixed with the raw reality. He had lost everything for a fake woman, and at the same time, he had lost a loyal wife. The next noon, Alexander was sitting in the living room looking at the empty patio. He wanted to leave the house to clear his head, but he didn't know where to go. He no longer had the right to go to work, and his friends in the industry avoided him, fearing being involved. Eleanor, seeing her son, felt her heart shrink. Reluctantly, she called a real estate agent to urgently sell the lake house upstate and get money for debts. She wanted Alexander to at least have something to live on or to try to clear his name. In the afternoon, Eleanor got dressed and dragged Alexander to meet the agent, taking the property deed with her. Both headed in a hurry to the title company. In Eleanor's mind, she was still convinced that although she once told Rachel they would put the estate in Alexander's name, she kept the original. She thought it would be a quick procedure. Upon arrival, the agent already had a buyer waiting to sign the reservation. They sat down and handed the folder to the notary. She opened it and frowned. The property holder is Rachel. No co-owner named Alexander or Eleanor is listed. Eleanor, astonished, exclaimed, "You must be mistaken. Review the deed." "We bought it, my daughter-in-law," she affirmed. "She can't be the sole owner." The notary reviewed the data and pointed to the registry. "Excuse me, this is the latest update. The estate belongs exclusively to Mrs. Rachel. According to the registry, it has never been transferred to anyone else." Alexander snatched the paper, his heart beating wildly. He clearly saw Rachel's name as the sole owner, with a confirmation stamp from the previous year. Now he remembered that Rachel had told him they would complete the paperwork so he would appear as a co-owner, but he never did it. He froze, understanding he had no right to sell that estate. Just at that moment, Rachel appeared with her usual elegance. She approached the table, looked at her mother-in-law and Alexander, and then addressed the official politely. "I am Rachel, the owner of the estate, and I do not agree with its sale." With that, she left a document on the table, requesting the blocking of the transaction. Alexander's gaze was lost, and Eleanor's face turned ashen. The agent and the buyer began to whisper. Upon learning the truth, they lost all interest and got up to leave. Eleanor stammered, "Have you been following me? How did you know I was selling it today, Rachel?" She responded calmly, "I haven't followed you. It is simply my property. You should have consulted me first." Eleanor was speechless. Alexander couldn't reply. He only felt everything crumbling. For a long time he had ignored his wife's investments, believing she had nothing, and it turned out even the estate belonged to her. In the notary's office, the atmosphere was suffocating. Eleanor realized her role as director had become ridiculous. She thought she had control, and turned out to be the one with nothing. Rachel picked up the blocking document, said goodbye to the official, and left. Alexander ran after her, but only saw her enter the elevator. For the second time in a month, he stood planted in a notary's office while his wife left him behind, adding a new and humiliating failure. They returned home at sunset. Eleanor stumbled into her room and slammed the door. At this point, she no longer had the face to look at her daughter-in-law. From the fiasco with Chloe and her fake pregnancy to the attempt to sell the estate, everything had been a disaster. Alexander sat in the living room with empty eyes. He realized with pain that for years he had despised the silent Rachel, but it turned out she held everything in her hands. It turned out she was the one who could decide his life. Amid the gloomy atmosphere, Rachel returned at dusk, serene and with a cold expression. She saw Alexander's dejected look, but didn't bother to console him. He looked up and said with a hoarse voice, "Rachel, I know I was wrong. You can punish me as long as you want, but is there any way I can make amends?" Rachel shook her head. "I don't think you have the right to that. I don't have time to punish anyone. I'm just recovering what is mine," Alexander insisted. "Maybe you're still my wife. I'll make it up to you." Rachel interrupted him with a tired smile. "Compensate me? You kicked me out of your life to bring Chloe in. Now that she's gone, you remember me. I don't want to hear any more." With that, she passed by him and went directly up the stairs. The house grew dark. The light bulb in the living room flickered. Alexander remained seated with his head in his hands, feeling infinite regret. That night, Eleanor didn't leave her room. Rumor had it she was sick. She called the housekeeper to help her, moaning with rage in a low voice. Alexander, for his part, locked himself in his room, dejected. The spacious house no longer held laughter, only the creaking of a ceiling fan. Rachel, in her room, opened the safe and reviewed all her property documents. Her goal wasn't to suffocate them until they had nothing. She simply couldn't stand their arrogant, defiant, and contemptuous attitude anymore. She understood her time to leave was approaching, and by then, neither Eleanor nor Alexander nor even Chloe could ever harass her again. She put the papers in a secret compartment and turned off the light. Her heart was hardened enough not to cry. Tomorrow she would continue getting up early to go to the company, like just another employee, but people would start to understand who she really was. She just had to wait for the official statement about the company personnel and the final outcome in that house. They had pushed her aside with all possible cruelty. Now she would strike back with what they deserved. After the humiliating revelation about Chloe, the house became even gloomier. Eleanor no longer mentioned her grandson with enthusiasm, nor worried about meals. She muttered to herself, calculating over and over who she could borrow money from, or who might buy the estate or the house to save the situation. Alexander no longer went near the company. He had been suspended indefinitely, without pay, without a position, and without hope of returning. Seeing her son waste away, Eleanor felt immense pain, but she knew no one to blame but herself. For days, Alexander wandered around the house, occasionally going out to the balcony to look at the street. He realized that only a few months earlier he had everything: the respect of his colleagues, a high position in the company, and a wife he had never valued as she deserved. Now he had nothing. Even his old friends from the industry avoided contact as if he brought bad luck. He could only count on his mother, and she was desperate for money. Eleanor lived on her savings and the money Alexander gave her each month, but since he got involved with his mistress and spent on Chloe, that amount had decreased. Furthermore, Chloe herself had emptied the savings account she shared with Eleanor. Now the house was truly in ruins, and hardly any valuable jewelry remained. In her despair, Eleanor thought of the estate they lived in, the Greenwich house. It was her late husband's inheritance. Every time she had considered selling it, she had discarded the idea, seeing it as a place tied to his memory, but now she had no other choice. If Alexander didn't get money, both would sink. One afternoon she called Alexander to her room in a low voice. "I'm thinking of putting the house up for sale. It's a large property. Surely they'll give us a good price. With that money, we'll pay off the debts and look for a smaller place to rent." Alexander was stunned. "Sell the house, Mom? This estate is the memory of Dad and you." Eleanor wiped a tear. "What memory or what nothing when we are in misery? That Chloe woman has fleeced us. The company no longer exists for you. If we cling to the house, we'll drown. Is there any other option?" Alexander lowered his head with a shrinking heart. He had boasted that whatever happened, he would always have a house and a company. It turned out everything had vanished. He didn't dare ask Rachel for help. He had hurt her too much and had nothing to convince her to trust him again. After thinking for a while, he sighed. "Mom, if you want to sell it, do it. I won't oppose." Eleanor nodded, desolate. She told herself she would call a real estate agency. In a few days, buyers would come to see the house and close the deal quickly so they could move on. For her, selling the house was the last thing she wanted, but seeing Alexander collapse every day, she had to grit her teeth. That night, Alexander tossed and turned in bed looking at the ceiling. Eleanor's voice continued echoing from the kitchen, scolding the housekeeper for some fallen papers. From time to time she said aloud, "That Rachel, how calm she is. She doesn't worry at all about Alexander. How lucky she is." Her words reached his room, but he couldn't react. After all, how could he demand Rachel save him when he himself had repudiated her? 2 days later, a real estate agent came to see the house. Eleanor showed him the 3 floors, boasting about the almost new kitchen, the spacious living room with high-quality tiles, and the garden with an old swing. The agent nodded and said he would recommend it to some clients. Rachel arrived from work just as they were leaving. She greeted them politely without asking questions. Eleanor let out a snort and continued showing the storage room to the client. The scene looked as if Rachel were a stranger staying in the same estate she had once cared for with dedication. That night in her room, Rachel remembered her lawyer friend's words. "Do you want to buy the house? If you buy it, they surely sink completely." At that moment, she responded, "If the price is reasonable, I'm willing. After all, it's a place I was attached to, even if the memories aren't good." She decided not to reveal herself, but to have a third party negotiate on her behalf. She didn't want them to know immediately that it was she who put up the money. The next day, the intermediary met Eleanor in a coffee shop to sign the reservation. She, excited, told Alexander, "We've taken the first step. In a week we'll surely sell it." Alexander reflected with a heavy heart. Although it hurt to lose his home, there was no other choice. He forced a smile. "Mom, if you sell it, I don't know what I'll do. At least it will rid us of the debts." In the company, Rachel continued working as head of finance, discreetly observing events. Her colleagues gossiped about Alexander's suspension and Chloe's disappearance. Some speculated, "Does it have anything to do with Rachel? I heard a mysterious shareholder supports her." Rachel smiled slightly without confirming or denying. She knew sooner or later it would be discovered she was the majority shareholder, but she preferred to keep it secret as long as possible to avoid unnecessary attention. In the following days, the house sale ad attracted many visitors. Rachel sometimes arrived and found strangers coming and going. Eleanor showed the property with enthusiasm, boasting that it had been a legacy from her late husband. The memory of 7 years ago, when Rachel arrived as a daughter-in-law, returned to her mind. Back then, Eleanor was kind and treated her like a daughter, but just because she couldn't have children, everything changed, leading them to the current situation. On the weekend, the agent informed Eleanor that a client was determined to close the deal. She, excited, planned everything for the next morning. They would invite the client to the notary to sign and hand over the second payment of the reservation. In a week, they would receive the rest of the money and move. She asked Alexander to start packing important things. Alexander was always melancholic, especially looking at the family photos hanging on the wall. This house held many memories, not only of his parents, but also of the first days of his life with Rachel. Who would have said it would now change hands due to a mistake of his? On the morning of the contract signing, Alexander put on a shirt, looking neat, but compared to his former elegance, he now looked like a shadow. Eleanor whispered to her son, "I know it hurts you. Me too, but living like this isn't sustainable. Both left the house in silence and called a taxi to go to the notary. There, the buyer waited for them with a lawyer. The procedure promised to be quick, just closing the price and signing. However, upon opening the file, the main buyer didn't appear. Instead, there was a lawyer and a legal representative. Eleanor didn't care much as long as the money arrived. She would be satisfied. The notary reviewed everything and invited her to sign. Just as she was about to pick up the pen, the door to the room burst open. Rachel entered, dressed impeccably, looking at Eleanor and her son. Alexander startled, not expecting her appearance. Eleanor also froze and shouted at her, "What are you doing here? The sale of this house has nothing to do with you." Rachel approached the table calmly, observed the tense face of the other party's lawyer, and smiled bitterly. "Excuse the delay. I had to add some documents. Actually, the buyer of this house is me." Her voice was soft, but for Alexander, it was like thunder. Eleanor, stunned, stammered, You are buying the house that belonged to my family?" Before she could finish, the notary showed her a purchase agreement with Rachel's name clearly visible in the buyer column, along with confirmation of her financial solvency. The representative who had been silent nodded. "Mrs. Rachel has already paid the reservation. Only the purchase contract remains to be signed." In that instant, Eleanor felt the ground opening beneath her feet. The woman she had despised and humiliated was now buying the very house she was trying to sell to survive. She understood that if she didn't sell, they would have no other way out, and if she sold, it meant they would have to move. And to top off the irony, the new owner was her former daughter-in-law. She turned pale and bit her lip until it bled, but could say nothing. Alexander beside her gripped the chair with trembling hands. How could he have imagined it? He had spent half his life fighting only to end up selling his house to his own wife. Rachel looked at Eleanor without intending to mock, only with a cold smile. "I know you need the money urgently. I've decided to buy it to save you the trouble of finding another buyer. The paperwork is ready. Sign, please." Eleanor was furious, but saw herself cornered. The price Rachel offered was exactly what she wanted. Rejecting it wasn't an option. Under the gaze of the notary and the lawyers, she signed tremblingly, every stroke of ink like a stab to her rotten pride. Once signed, Rachel took the contract, reviewed it, and nodded. "Thank you. Once the procedure is completed, you and Alexander can take your time to move out. I'm in no hurry." Her voice was impassive, almost like an order. Eleanor remained seated. Tears ran down her face. Regret, humiliation, shame, everything mixed together. Alexander avoided his wife's gaze, lacking the courage to face her. He wanted to ask her, "Are you doing this for revenge?" But he understood she didn't need revenge. She was simply demonstrating that everything they thought she didn't have, she actually had in spades, and now she had the power, the shares, and the house. They left the notary. Eleanor, guided by Alexander, walked dragging her feet down the hallway. Rachel stayed behind with her representative, discussing the transfer deadlines. She smiled slightly when the representative whispered to her, "You have been very skillful. You have sunk them completely." Rachel replied, "I just bought a property they wanted to sell, nothing more." In the afternoon, the atmosphere in the house was more oppressive than ever. Eleanor sat in the living room curled up. The walls, the tiles, everything remained the same, but now she knew everything belonged to Rachel. The daughter-in-law she had despised was now the legal owner. Alexander didn't dare speak, only collected his things in silence. The estate, which had already been cold in recent times, now seemed covered by a layer of invisible ice. Rachel returned almost at dusk. She saw Eleanor still sitting there and, showing no emotion, asked the housekeeper if she had prepared dinner. Eleanor looked at her, lips trembling, moving. "Rachel, after all, this house has family memories." Rachel interrupted her. "I have no intention of destroying them. Rest assured. I just bought it following procedure. If you want to look for another place, I'll give you more time." Her words were both polite and cold. At night, Alexander was on the balcony with eyes reddened by alcohol. He laughed, remembering how his mother mocked Rachel for having nothing. Now he was the one depending on her for a roof. But what right did he have to ask her for anything? Since Chloe appeared, he had destroyed his marriage. Now that the consequences were falling on him, he understood everything. In the old bedroom, Rachel gathered some of her things preparing for her move. She hadn't bought the house to live in it, just for them to experience what it was like to be ripped from their comfort zone. She understood that maintaining a relationship with them under the same roof no longer made sense. The yellow light projected her shadow on the wall. She looked in the mirror, pressing her lips in silence. An old chapter had ended. Although on the outside she seemed strong, inside she felt a pang of pain. After all, this place had been her home. The next day, the real estate agent returned to deliver more documents and confirmed that the bank had transferred all the money to Eleanor's account. She checked her account and saw the amount was correct, but only sighed with resignation. A few months earlier, that sum would have been a dream. Now it meant failure. She understood that although that money would allow her and Alexander to stabilize temporarily, the word home no longer existed for them. At the company, word spread that Rachel was the new owner of a large estate and the majority shareholder who had just revealed herself through her representative. Some employees were amazed. Others thought she was incredibly skillful for having kept it secret for so long. Rachel heard the rumors without bothering to explain herself. She completed some documents for the next month's meeting, where she would participate openly as the principal shareholder. At that moment, she knew Alexander was sinking deeper and deeper into crisis. He no longer had the capacity to recover. The man who had challenged her to sign the divorce if she couldn't handle it was now completely defeated. In the afternoon, Rachel went to the bank to review the transactions related to the house. Everything was fine. She nodded slightly. Although she didn't live there, she could use it as collateral or sell it to an investor. The important thing was that Eleanor and Alexander had received the money to solve their problems. At night, she drove back and saw Alexander standing in front of the door smoking. He looked at her and tried to say something, but only lowered his head in silence. They passed each other like strangers. The patio light projected their two shadows, once sharing a bed, now separated. Rachel entered the house and took off her shoes. She heard Eleanor coughing in her room. The housekeeper told her she was tired, probably with high blood pressure from stress. Rachel didn't comment, just left a glass of warm water in front of her door. She didn't need to mock or scold her. Everything was clear. Whoever had treated her that way eventually suffered the consequences. Upstairs in her room, she sat on the bed, opened her laptop, and reviewed the list of her assets: the lake house upstate, the estate in Greenwich, the company shares. Everything was the fruit of her effort and intelligence. For a moment, she remembered her mother, who had left her the initial capital. She was sure that wherever she was, her mother would feel proud that her daughter knew how to defend herself and not let herself be trampled. If Alexander and Eleanor hadn't hurt her so deeply, perhaps she would continue supporting them, but unfortunately, they had chosen the path of cruelty. That night, the house went dark early. No one felt like making noise. Alexander tossed and turned in bed. Eleanor cried in her room. Rachel didn't sleep well either, but she didn't feel tormented. She went out to the balcony to look at the sky sprinkled with stars. The night wind was cold. Starting tomorrow, she would organize her move. She would look for a completely separate place to end her life with people with whom she no longer had any bond. Now she naturally assumed her role as owner like just another business deal. This place was no longer a home. She had lost faith and had promised herself not to blindly trust anyone who didn't deserve it again. After officially buying the estate, Rachel moved to a serviced apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Manhattan. She didn't worry about when Eleanor and Alexander would move out. She simply told her representative to give them a few days to organize. She wasn't strict. She told them to leave when it suited them. What she wanted, she had already achieved. Freedom. She didn't want to stay trapped under the same roof with those who had driven her to bitterness. The new apartment wasn't as big as the estate, but it had all the amenities. The living room had a large window overlooking a tree-lined street. As soon as she finished settling in, Rachel dropped onto the sofa, tired but relieved. This was the life she should have chosen a long time ago, instead of resigning herself to live in that place, enduring unjustified contempt. She took a shower, put on pajamas, lit an essential oil diffuser, and relaxed. The first night in her new home, she didn't hear her mother-in-law's door slams, nor Chloe's strident voice, nor did she have to face Alexander's cold gaze. The next morning, Rachel had fruit for breakfast and went to the company. She maintained her impeccable appearance and serene attitude. Arriving at the office, some employees greeted her. One of them commented, "Mrs. Rachel, lately you look more beautiful. Any good news?" Rachel just smiled. Not good news, but a liberation. All morning she reviewed financial figures, signed several contracts. Her subordinates admired her for her professionalism and calm. During a break, she received a call from Alexander. Seeing his name on the screen, she hesitated a few seconds before answering. Alexander's voice on the other end sounded hoarse. "Sorry to bother you, but my mother is very sick. She doesn't want to go to the hospital. Could you come convince her?" Rachel closed her eyes and sighed. Before, she would have worried instantly. Now calmly she responded, "If she's sick, you should take her to the doctor. I no longer have a say in your family." Alexander fell silent, then insisted. "My mother still considers you her daughter-in-law. Although she doesn't say it, I know she regrets it." Rachel smiled bitterly. "It's too late. If she really considered me her daughter-in-law, she wouldn't have kicked me out to welcome another. If you need it, I can contact a trusted doctor to have her admitted, but going to convince her isn't necessary. I don't think it's my duty." Alexander was left speechless. Rachel, not wanting to prolong the conversation, said, "I'm busy now. Call an ambulance. Goodbye." She hung up, suppressing the wave of compassion she felt. That noon, Rachel ate in the office and took the opportunity to discuss a new plan with her partners. Her life had returned to the work routine without having to worry about making dinner for anyone, without the burden of inquisitive looks. She was freer than ever, but the joy was bittersweet. She had lost a family, even if it was imperfect. She told herself she had already paid the price and had no reason to feel guilty. At home, Eleanor lay in bed with a high fever and an irritated throat. Alexander, scared, took her to the ER. While waiting in the hallway, with his chin resting on his hands, he watched the people coming and going. He called some old friends to borrow money for hospital expenses, but everyone gave him excuses. The kindest one told him he would call him back. Desperate, he thought of Rachel, but discarded the idea immediately. He knew she no longer wanted to help him, and he didn't dare ask after everything he had done to her. At sunset, the hospital's billing department flagged Eleanor's admission. Her premium insurance had lapsed due to non-payment, and Alexander's credit cards were declined for the private VIP suite Eleanor demanded. "I'm sorry, sir," the administrator said coolly. "Without a valid payment method for the private room upgrade, we'll have to move her to a semi-private room in the general ward." Eleanor, with a weak voice, asked him, "We already sold the house." "Where is the money, son?" Alexander, dejected, replied, "Mom, don't you remember we used part of that money to pay old debts? Now we have very little left and still have to pay the rent. Try to recover soon so we can go home." Hearing this, Eleanor burst into tears. She had never imagined that after selling her house they would remain in such a precarious financial situation. At night, Alexander sat on a bench in the hospital courtyard. He remembered the image of Rachel in recent months, enduring mockery and silence, and now re-emerging to take control of everything. He realized he had been a fool. Beside him, Eleanor, despite her cruelty, remained his mother. Chloe had been just a deception, and he himself had destroyed his peaceful marriage with Rachel. In the darkness of the night, Alexander smoked a cigarette while a rare man's tear fell down his cheek. He had wanted to change his destiny, but everything had vanished. Now he was ruined, his mother sick, and his family destroyed. In the middle of the night, Eleanor, half delirious, sweated from the fever. Alexander barely managed to buy her an antipyretic. The nurse warned him they should watch her closely, as her blood pressure was unstable and she needed more tests. Alexander nodded, and again desperately looked for someone to ask for money. No one was willing to help him like before. He thought of Rachel, but his pride held him back. He knew asking her for help now was humiliating. He could only whisper, "It's my fault. It's all my fault." The next day, while in her office, Rachel received a call from a nurse she knew. She told her that a patient named Eleanor was admitted to the cardiology unit and that part of the hospital bill remained unpaid. She asked if she could help. Rachel pressed her lips together, knowing the hospital erroneously considered her the daughter-in-law. At first she thought of refusing, but then realized she couldn't remain indifferent. After all, Eleanor had been her mother-in-law and at first had treated her well. It was later, due to many circumstances, that she became so cruel. After an internal struggle, she decided to go to the bank and transfer an amount sufficient to cover basic expenses. She sent a text to Alexander. "I have temporarily paid your mother's treatment costs. You should manage the insurance or look for more funding. Don't expect more help from me." After sending it, she turned off the phone without waiting for a reply. Alexander received the message and felt a lump in his throat. The words were cold but meaningful. He thanked her even though he knew she didn't want to hear it. He tried to send a thank you again, but received no response. Still, he felt relieved. At least she wasn't completely ruthless, and his mother would have the chance to receive proper treatment. In her new apartment, Rachel was reorganizing her life. She got up early, made a simple breakfast, and went to work. In the afternoon, she exercised in the nearby park. At night, she had time to read or watch the news. Independent life opened many spaces for her, but also helped her find peace. She no longer had to listen to complaints, criticism, or comparisons. She was the owner of all her decisions. She realized she was much stronger than before. At the end of the month, the company organized an event for the opening of a new branch. The board of directors formally invited Rachel to attend as the principal shareholder, whose identity was about to be revealed. The ceremony took place in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel, with numerous journalists and guests present. Rachel wore a cream-colored business suit with light makeup that radiated confidence. Walking down the red carpet, many photographers focused on her. Some company employees whispered in amazement. Turns out, Mrs. Rachel is the real owner of the majority of shares. There was surprise, respect, and also envy. In the glittering hall, several executives gave their speeches. Then it was Rachel's turn. She approached the microphone and spoke a few brief words about collaboration plans and the company's future. Her voice was calm and clear, without arrogance. The people applauded enthusiastically. At that moment, she realized that for a long time, she had hidden behind the scenes, pretending to be a simple employee. Today, under the spotlights, she declared her true role. She felt a mix of pride and relief, as if a great weight had been lifted off her shoulders. At the subsequent party, guests congratulated her continuously. Former colleagues approached to greet her, some shyly. "I didn't know you were the majority shareholder. If I ever disrespected you, I apologize." Rachel smiled. "It's nothing. Work is work." She showed no resentment towards anyone, which made them admire her even more. Ending the party, she sighed relieved while drinking her last juice. She thought, "This is a new path. I will build the company in the right direction, without backing down for anyone." The next day, Alexander found out about Rachel's official revelation. Sitting by his mother's bed in the hospital, he silently looked at photos of Rachel at the elegant ceremony. He felt a pang in his heart. He remembered how he had once told her, "Stay home. I'll handle PR. You be a good support." It turned out she was the truly talented one. Suddenly he felt inferior, regretful, and envious. He turned off the phone and looked at Eleanor. She remained with her eyes closed, sighing occasionally. The fever had gone down, but her health hadn't recovered. The money Rachel had advanced was already spent. Now both had little left and didn't know what they would do in the future. As if understanding the situation, Rachel decided to transfer the insurance policy she had secretly taken out for Eleanor years ago when she started having blood pressure problems. Thus, the hospital could expedite the paperwork and she received better care. Alexander's eyes filled with tears, knowing Rachel still worried about his mother's insurance. He realized she wasn't cruel, simply no longer by his side as before. Between them was an invisible wall he and his mother had built. The more he thought, the more it hurt. One afternoon, Alexander was leaving the hospital and casually ran into Rachel. She had brought fruit and milk for a nurse to give to Eleanor. He stayed a few steps away and called her in a low voice, "Rachel." She turned with a serene gaze. He felt his heart shrink. He wanted to tell her so many things, but the words got stuck in his throat. Finally, he could only say, "Thank you." Rachel nodded slightly without answering and turned to leave. Her figure mixed quickly with the crowd, decisive and resolute. Alexander followed her with his gaze, his heart empty. That night, Rachel returned to her apartment, made a cup of hot tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the street lamps projected a yellow light on the treetops. She took a sip, remembering the days she lived with Alexander, planning shopping together, caring for the family. They had happy moments. Then she remembered Chloe, the woman who took advantage of a fake pregnancy, and Eleanor, who went from attentive to so cruel she welcomed her son's mistress home. All that was in the past. Her life had entered a new phase where she had control of her finances and, above all, herself. She no longer depended on anyone. Events had hardened her, but also made her mature. She promised herself to live with dignity without allowing anyone to trample her again. The aroma of tea with a hint of jasmine filled the air. She smiled slightly and brought her hand to her chest, feeling the calm beats of her heart. She didn't know if anyone else would enter her life, but for now, she had big professional goals. She would fight for the company to be stronger and stronger and, most importantly, maintain the self-esteem of a woman who would never give up. On her phone, a message from her lawyer informed her that the transfer procedures for the estate were complete. "Do you want to invest or sell it?" "I'm at your disposal," she replied briefly. "For the moment, we'll keep it. I want to think about it." After all, that house held memories. Although most were painful, she was in no hurry to decide. Maybe someday she would sell or rent it. The night passed in silence, like her own journey from storm to calm. Somewhere, Alexander continued fighting with a rudderless life. Eleanor lay in a hospital bed, and nothing was known of Chloe. They were like broken pieces of a puzzle, each on their own side. Thinking of this, Rachel closed the curtains silently, turned off the light, and slept. Then she no longer felt tormented as before because everything was clear. Life must go on, and she would advance firmly without looking back. Alexander sat silently on a bench outside the hospitalization unit. Eleanor had just been temporarily discharged after several weeks of treatment, but her health remained fragile, and she needed to recover at home. The problem was that home was now an old, cramped apartment Alexander had rented with the little money he had left. No matter how much he thought, he saw no way to return to his old life. He had destroyed everything himself. Before, he never worried about calculating the cost of a meal. Now he avoided his friends because he didn't have the confidence to invite anyone for coffee or dinner. Sometimes he just wanted to give up, but his mother needed care and he had to do odd jobs to survive, jumping from one employment to another. They were low-paying manual jobs, but he didn't dare tell his mother for fear she would feel humiliated. Suddenly he remembered Rachel, the woman he had discarded without consideration. If he had valued her, he wouldn't be in this situation. At sunset, Alexander returned to the cramped apartment. Eleanor lay on a bed that creaked with a desolate look. She had just fallen asleep when there was a knock at the door. Alexander startled, thinking it was the landlord asking for rent, but upon opening, he froze seeing Chloe. She appeared looking gaunt with dark circles, her hair tied back haphazardly, and an old purse in her hand. Her eyes met Alexander's and she burst into tears. "Alexander, can I come in?" Alexander, who believed Chloe had disappeared forever, was speechless. He stood in the threshold and asked coldly, "What are you doing here?" Chloe, trembling, replied, "I've been scammed out of all my money. I have nowhere to go. Please let me stay a few days. I know I did wrong, but—" Her voice broke pleadingly. Alexander remembered the day Chloe knelt in the patio of his house when her deception was discovered. He felt a pang of bitterness. After all, he had felt something for her. He had been willing to sacrifice his marriage for her. He hesitated, but finally shook his head. "And what would you gain staying here? My mother is sick. I can barely take care of her. What do you want from me?" Chloe, crying, knelt and clung to his pants. "I only need a place to sleep. I promise I'll leave soon. Please, help me. I'm starving." At that moment, Eleanor, hearing the noise, got up with effort and limped out. Seeing Chloe kneeling at Alexander's feet, she stood stone still and her face lit up with rage. Heavens! That viper dares to return. Get out of here. Chloe looked at Eleanor with her face bathed in tears. Ma'am, I was wrong. I just want to stay a few days. I have nothing left. Eleanor shouted at her. I already kicked you out when you staged the fake pregnancy scene. Why are you back now? What do you want? Alexander helplessly watched the scene, Chloe crying at his feet and his mother furious. He stood motionless a moment with a blank mind. Finally, seeing Chloe's pitiful state, he turned to his mother with resignation. Mom, after all, she lived with us. Now she's in trouble. I can let her stay one night and tomorrow I'll kick her out. Eleanor was going to shout again, but a coughing fit interrupted her, leaving her breathless. Alexander, frightened, held her and patted her back. She could only say with a hoarse voice, "Do you pity her that much?" Then, exhausted, she collapsed into a chair. Chloe took the opportunity to enter and curl up in a corner, hugging her purse. Eleanor, furious, didn't look at her anymore, only sighed and told Alexander, "I don't feel like arguing. Do what you want, but kick her out soon. I don't want more problems." With that, she lay on the bed exhausted. That night, in the ramshackle apartment, 3 people sat in 3 corners. Alexander gave Chloe a mattress on the floor. Eleanor turned her back to the wall, trembling with rage. Chloe sobbed, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to return, but my boyfriend scammed me out of all the money. I've been hiding for months." Alexander didn't look at her, only sighed. Now he had nothing she could take advantage of. Chloe had returned out of desperation, hoping he would save her. Perhaps she thought he was still rich, not imagining he was as ruined as she. In the middle of the night, Chloe complained of hunger. Alexander searched his pockets and found a few coins. He went out to buy a cheap meal. Chloe ate as if there were no tomorrow. Tears ran down her cheeks. Eleanor, hearing the noise of food, got annoyed and pretended to sleep. Chloe looked at Alexander sideways and whispered, "Don't you have money anymore? I remember before you had an estate, a car." Alexander smiled bitterly. "Have you forgotten? The estate was sold, the car too. I don't even have enough for myself. How am I going to support you?" He left the sentence unfinished and turned toward the window. Chloe understood the situation and lowered her head without daring to complain anymore. The next morning, Chloe got up very early and left in silence. She knew there was nothing to cling to there. Alexander and Eleanor couldn't help her. They themselves were in misery. Alexander saw her leave with her purse and only shook his head without retaining her. He no longer trusted her. There were already enough problems, and with Chloe, they would only get worse. He turned towards his mother. Eleanor was dejected, pale. She had understood the price she had to pay. She looked at her son with aging, teary eyes as if saying, "It's my fault. I never imagined things would end so badly." That afternoon, Alexander decided to look for work. They recommended a construction materials warehouse to work as a porter. It was physical work with low but stable pay. At least he could pay for his mother's medicines. While waiting for the interview, he looked at his old university degree and felt deep sadness. He remembered the feeling of power he had as CEO. All that was just a memory. At the same time, Rachel was busy with the company's expansion plans. She attended a negotiation with a partner presenting and defending the new direction, which impressed everyone. Her style was calm and convincing, very different from the docile and submissive woman of before. She received many praises and some offers of collaboration. At the end of the meeting, she rejected all dinner invitations, politely postponing them for another time. A young foreign businessman expressed his admiration, praising her beauty and character, but she also smiled without promising anything. At night, she returned to her apartment. While making tea, she observed the night through the window. She remembered that when she separated from Alexander, everything was chaos, but now she had gotten used to independence. No one scolded her, no one criticized her. She was free to work and rest. While thinking, the phone rang. It was Alexander's number. She hesitated a moment and answered. His voice sounded exhausted. "Rachel, can you come out to see me? I'm downstairs in the lobby." She frowned but accepted. A few minutes later, she went down and saw Alexander sitting on a bench, thin and hollow-eyed. He nodded by way of greeting, not daring to look her in the eye. "What do you want?" asked Rachel. Her voice maintained a distance, neither cold nor warm. Alexander looked up. "My mother fainted this afternoon. I took her to the ER and they discharged her soon. She says she wants to see you. I know it's no longer your responsibility, but she says she'll only calm down if she sees you." Rachel remained silent for a few seconds and sighed. She remembered Eleanor's actions, but thought she was also sick. "Is she in the hospital?" "No," answered Alexander. "She just came home because she didn't want to stay. She says she's afraid of the expenses, but she's not well. The doctor said she needs rest and to take medication." Rachel crossed her arms looking at Alexander. She didn't know how to act, whether to ignore him or go visit her. She had suffered much, but she no longer felt resentment. Seeing his haggard appearance, she nodded. "All right, I'll go, but as soon as I finish, I'm leaving." "You have no right to keep me. I'm only going because she's sick, not for anything else." Alexander's eyes shone with gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured. Then they went out to the street and took a taxi. During the journey, they barely spoke. The night wind slipped through the window, bringing the chill of late spring. Rachel, sitting by the window, observed the endless car lights. She remembered that in the past, she and Alexander had also taken taxis after their dates, laughing and talking. She never imagined they would come to this. Alexander turned occasionally, as if wanting to say something, but fearing she didn't want to listen. Arriving, she saw Eleanor curled up in an old bed with dim light and a smell of dampness in the air. She sat up and seeing her enter, her eyes filled with tears. You really came, Rachel?" Leaving a bag of medicine on the table, she said softly, "I brought some medicines. Take them." Eleanor took her hand. Tears ran down her face. There was no longer arrogance or hurtful words. She cried like a child, her shoulders shaking. Rachel let her hold her hand in silence, listening to her sob. "I was wrong, Rachel. I know I was wrong a long time ago. I thought I would have a grandson, and it turned out to be a deception. I thought kicking you out would maintain my family. In the end, I lost everything and left Alexander in ruins. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness." Her voice trembled. Hearing those words, Rachel's eyes filled with tears. If she had said them before, maybe everything would have been different, but after all, facing illness, people usually rethink. She just said softly, "Don't think about that now. Take your medicines. Health is the most important thing." Eleanor squeezed her hand, pleading, "Can you come home? I know the house isn't mine anymore, but if you're here, I'll feel calm. I promise I won't be like before. I won't pressure you about children." Tears fell down her face. Alexander, seeing the scene, felt his heart shrink. Rachel remained silent. She was moved, but how was she going to return? The old house had been sold and she had her own life. She handed her a glass of water and said calmly, "Thank you for remembering me, but I don't think my return solves anything. Rest and recover. I will continue helping you with medicines and treatment expenses, as I have done so far." Eleanor, hearing this, understood she didn't want to return. She lowered her head, squeezing the glass, and after a long while whispered, "It's okay. I won't force you. I just hope you find happiness. During all these years, I treated you very badly. Now I understand you were the only one who really cared about this family." The atmosphere became silent. Alexander, in a corner, kept his head down without daring to intervene. Rachel nodded slightly without saying more and reviewed the medicines, explaining how to take them. At that moment, he followed her every gesture, feeling a mix of remorse and admiration. Then he blurted out, "Are you okay lately?" She, without turning, replied, "I'm fine, thank you." A short answer, but one that hurt his soul. No wonder she looked increasingly serene, increasingly unreachable. Once finished, Rachel prepared to leave. Eleanor wanted her to stay the night, but she refused, maintaining her polite attitude. Eleanor let her go with a lost gaze. Alexander accompanied her silently to the door. Outside it was dark, only a street lamp lit the street. Under the porch, Alexander took a deep breath. He knew there were no more chances, but said, I'm sorry for everything. Rachel bowed her head. We've both suffered. You don't need to say anything else. He looked at her, seeing her silhouette under the yellow light, a fragile but strong beauty. Suddenly she spoke. If you really want your mother to worry less, work hard. Don't neglect yourself. I will continue covering her medicine expenses, not for you, but because she was once my mother-in-law. With that, she turned and hailed a taxi. Alexander stood motionless, watching her go. He understood that her promise of help came from compassion, not love. She no longer had any responsibility towards him. The taxi light took her figure away. Alexander felt the distance between them was an ever-widening abyss. 2 days later, unexpectedly, Alexander received a call from an old colleague. He invited him to a coffee shop, telling him he had a small job for him. Alexander thought it was an opportunity and hoped to make some money for his mother. Arriving, he was surprised to meet Chloe. Turns out she was also looking for work. This old colleague wanted Alexander to collaborate with Chloe on a small multi-level marketing project. Alexander, frightened, shook his head. He knew Chloe couldn't be trusted. Seeing his attitude, Chloe burst into tears, telling him everything about her dark period. I really regret it. I need a chance. You also need work. Why don't you try it with me, Alexander? Indecisive, he saw that Chloe was willing to make an effort. Besides, the income could be good if they did well. Cornered, he accepted. They began days of going from place to place, presenting products, advising clients. Alexander still retained some of his persuasive ability, and Chloe was energetic. It was strange. When people hit rock bottom, they can put aside resentment and unite temporarily for survival. Alexander thought that after all, both he and Chloe had lost everything. It was better to give themselves a chance to live. He couldn't depend on Rachel forever. While Alexander and Chloe began their project, Rachel received an invitation to participate in an industry conference where she would be a speaker on her financial experience. She accepted. That day, dressed in an elegant black suit, she went up on stage amidst applause and under bright lights. Among the guests, she radiated natural confidence. Her voice was captivating. She explained her investment trajectory, how to control cash flow, and her experience in risk identification. Everyone listened attentively, and many media outlets recorded and took photos. Backstage, people whispered, "She's become very famous. I heard her husband betrayed her, and in the end, she became the majority shareholder. What character?" Others admired her. Rachel listened without rejoicing or being saddened. The past was the past. She didn't want to avoid it, but didn't want to use it for attention either. She only concentrated on her work. At night after the conference, some people invited her to a party. She wanted to leave early, but out of respect for her partners, she accepted. In the restaurant, a familiar figure suddenly appeared. It turned out the representative of today's partner was an old acquaintance of Alexander. She asked Rachel, "Are you still in contact with Alexander? I heard he's having a very hard time. It's a shame. You made a nice couple." Rachel smiled slightly. "That's all over. I don't want to talk about it." The girl nodded, saying she respected her past. Late at night, Rachel returned to her apartment with a restless heart. Sitting on the sofa, she prepared a cup of hot ginger tea, savoring its slight spice. She remembered Eleanor's words. "I know I was wrong. I just hope you find happiness." Had she really found happiness, or just freed herself from suffering? She felt calm, but fullness hadn't arrived yet. Her heart remained empty. Maybe because she had lost faith so deeply, she was in no hurry to open up to anyone. Her only need now was to do her job well and enjoy peace. Around 10 p.m., she received a text from Eleanor. Briefly, "I've already taken the meds. I'm fine, don't worry." She looked at the message and smiled slightly. Perhaps, even if they didn't get back together, a fragile and warm bond still remained between them, and that was enough. The next morning, she attended an internal meeting to introduce the new company management. The position of CEO was now occupied by another person, a young and dynamic face. Alexander had been fired. Everyone was very excited. Rachel, sitting in the chair of the chairwoman of the board of shareholders, approved decisions quickly. Seeing the company's progress, she felt encouraged. There was a time when she thought of dedicating all her effort to support Alexander. Now she understood that only when she herself occupied this position could she develop her full potential. She was no longer behind as a support. Now she held power with pride, and the results weren't bad. At night, surfing the internet, she came across an interview with Chloe. Turns out Chloe was using a PR strategy to promote some marketing product. She posed smiling, boasting of her effort to overcome difficulties. She said with hints, "I made mistakes in the past, but now I'm determined to start over. Everyone deserves a second chance." Rachel smiled slightly. At the end of the article, she saw a small photo of Chloe next to Alexander with a caption saying they were collaborating without mentioning their past as lovers. She put the phone away, drank a sip of water, didn't know what to feel. A bit of bitterness, but also indifference. Everyone fought to survive, and she no longer had reason to intervene. The following days, Chloe and Alexander were busy with their project. Alexander was getting used to the pace. Although he still looked gloomy, he strove to earn money for his mother. Every night he returned home and looked at his mobile without daring to send a message to Rachel. Meanwhile, Rachel was busy with new contracts. Sometimes she remembered the past, but without pain anymore. She passed by the bridal shop that held memories of her wedding, and now it was just a faded past. One day, while eating, Chloe asked Alexander, "Are you still in contact with your ex-wife?" Alexander, without looking up, replied dryly, "She's no longer my wife. We have nothing." "Why do you ask?" Chloe forced a smile. "I think everyone can change. Maybe she'll forgive you." Alexander felt a sharp pain and raised his sad eyes to Chloe. "Are you serious? Or are you mocking? You know better than anyone how I hurt her. There is no turning back." With that, he continued eating without looking at her again. She shrugged without daring to insist. Time passed and work pressure dragged them all. Rachel got involved in more projects and made good profits. One afternoon, while going to sign a contract, she saw a familiar figure at the entrance of her company building. Chloe and Alexander were approaching customers handing out flyers. It was an ironic scene. They had to do whatever it took to promote their product. Alexander also saw Rachel and, ashamed, lowered his head. Chloe, seeing her, didn't dare greet either. Rachel only nodded politely and passed by. She felt Alexander's silent bow when he realized the enormous difference that now existed between them. In the car, she leaned back in the seat and took a deep breath. Life was certainly ironic. The man who once stood above her now handed out flyers on the street. The woman who was once despised now traveled in a luxury car to close contracts. At that moment, she felt absolute calm. She felt neither joy nor sadness. Each had chosen their own path. At night, she returned home and prepared a good dinner with soft music in the background. She remembered Eleanor and sent her a message to see how she was. She replied briefly that she was taking her medicines and the situation was stable. Standing by the window, she watched the twinkling city lights like stars. Her life had found a new calm and serene course. All resentment had vanished like the wind. Like Chloe, Alexander, and Eleanor, everyone learned to fight for their future. No one owed anyone anything, except the pain left in memories. She turned, closed the window, and felt a deep sense of freedom. The bumpy road she had traveled had now smoothed out. She walked with a firm step on a new path, like a person reborn without submission, without fear of loss. Because what she had lost, she had already paid for with tears. Now only calm and determination remained. Rachel sat silently in her office, facing a stack of urgent documents from the board of directors. She reviewed the plan for the construction of the company's second branch, a large-scale expansion. The figures danced in her head, but she didn't feel tired, rather excited. It was a dream she had harbored for a long time, but previously had put behind her family dream. Now that the family no longer existed, her dream had the opportunity to spread its wings. She looked at the clock, 8 p.m. She decided to stop for the day. After a stressful day, she wanted to relax a bit. She left the office and drove to the outskirts of the city, where there was a small traditional diner. She craved something simple, a change after so many days of dinners in luxury restaurants. Arriving under the yellow light, she entered and ordered a hot stew. She looked for a discreet table. While eating, she realized there was a familiar face. Chloe was sitting at another table in a jacket, hair somewhat messy and an exhausted expression. Before Rachel could avoid her, Chloe saw her, put down her silverware, and nodded by way of greeting. In her gaze there was no longer the arrogance of before, but shame. Rachel thought about it for a moment and slowly got up and approached her table. "Are you having dinner?" she said with a calm voice. Chloe, nervous, replied, "Yes, ma'am." "Are you dining here too?" Rachel nodded and sat in the chair opposite. "I'm not used to that address. Call me whatever you want." "How are you, Chloe?" She put down the silverware and sighed. "Thanks for asking. I'm okay, more or less. The marketing project has just started. I don't know if it will succeed. Money is a problem. Sometimes I want to give up." Rachel looked at the young woman before her, remembering all her tricks, but all that had passed. She remained silent for a few seconds, and then said calmly, "Everyone has difficult moments. If you can't go on, look for another way. Don't think about depending on others." Chloe smiled bitterly. "I know I have no one to lean on now. And I'm sorry. I know I hurt you a lot. I faked the pregnancy. I caused you much pain." Her voice broke. Her eyes moistened. Rachel drank a sip of tea and said softly, "Everyone is responsible for their actions. I don't want to remember it or hold a grudge. Take care, and that will be enough." Hearing this, Chloe burst into tears, wiping them quickly. "You are very generous. I always thought you were docile and easy to manipulate, but you made me and Alexander's whole family pay a high price." Rachel frowned. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just recovered what was mine. I didn't do anything wrong. If you had acted decently, no one would have been hurt. It all started when you and Alexander betrayed me. My mother-in-law pampered you. I didn't force them." Chloe was left speechless with trembling lips. "Yes, I was wrong. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I really am sorry." Rachel shrugged, not knowing what else to say. She got up and returned to her table. Chloe remained thoughtful and then continued eating in silence. An unexpected encounter like a vestige of the past. Rachel finished dinner and went to pay. Discreetly, she also paid Chloe's bill. When Chloe went to pay, the owner told her someone had already paid for her. Chloe, surprised, knew it had been Rachel. She stood a moment at the restaurant door, watching Rachel's figure get into her car. She felt a strange emotion. That woman, in the end, was the only person who had shown her a little compassion. That night, returning to her apartment, Rachel felt exhausted, but at peace. Despite the encounter with Chloe, she no longer felt tension. Everything was like the wind. She took off her dress, put on pajamas, and went out to the balcony for some air. The phone rang. It was her best friend's mother. Rachel smiled, realizing she hadn't seen her friend in a long time. They talked for a while and agreed to go shopping on the weekend. The brief call made her feel warm. At least she still had other sincere relationships without any connection to Alexander or his family. The next morning she woke up, listened to soft music, and prepared to go to the company. First thing, she received a file from a subordinate. It was a proposal for a real estate project requiring a large investment. She studied it carefully. She saw potential, but also high risk. She decided to go inspect the site that same afternoon without approving anything lightly. She finished her work, left the office, and drove to the outskirts. Before her, a large plot of land a developer was subdividing. While observing, she saw Chloe there. It seemed she was selling plots to a client. It turned out the marketing company Chloe and Alexander worked for was related to this project. Chloe, from a distance, smiled nervously upon seeing Rachel. A moment later, Alexander appeared with a briefcase in hand. The three looked at each other awkwardly. Rachel maintained her calm and greeted with a nod. Alexander swallowed hard and approached with a trembling voice. "You came to inspect it," she replied in a low voice. "Yes, my company is considering investing," Chloe intervened. "If you need information, we have the dossiers." She handed her a sheaf of brochures without daring to look her in the eye. Rachel maintained a professional attitude. "Thank you. I'll review them. If it's suitable, our company will be in touch." They were standing in the middle of the vacant lot. The wind ruffled their hair. Alexander coughed slightly and looked in his briefcase for a more detailed brochure. He addressed Rachel with a voice trying to be calm. "This is the project plan. I'm just a marketing agent, but I assure you the potential is real." Rachel listened without being able to deny that he knew the information well. She took the documents with a serene look. "Thank you. I value your professionalism. You've been working hard lately, right?" Alexander fell silent, a slight twitch in his lips. He knew that compliment was insignificant compared to what he once had. Rachel leafed through the pages, asking some technical questions. Alexander answered clearly. Chloe beside him listened amazed. It turned out his experience as CEO served him well in this field. After reviewing everything, Rachel took the file. "Okay, I'll consider it. Good luck with sales." With that, she turned to get into her car. Chloe followed her with her gaze, without daring to say anything. Alexander followed her a few steps. "Rachel, thanks for giving me this opportunity. I hope." He couldn't say more, just sighed. She, without turning, opened the car door, nodded in greeting, and left. Alexander stood there watching the dust raised by the wheels. Chloe approached timidly. "Are you okay?" He shook his head and put the documents in his briefcase silently. He approached another client to present the project. He felt a pang of disappointment, but knew he had to keep working for his mother and himself. That same night, Rachel reviewed the project file at home. She analyzed it and sent some questions to her technical team. Despite work, she had time to prepare a simple dinner, vegetable soup, and some sautéed meat. After dinner, she received a text from Eleanor. "I'm better. Don't worry, Alexander is busy with his new work, always out. It's better than being at home depressed." Rachel remained silent without answering. She felt relieved to see Alexander had become self-sufficient. At least he took care of his mother. At night, sitting in front of her laptop, she suddenly remembered the image of Alexander standing under the sun, patiently presenting the project. She felt slight remorse. Deep down, he wasn't a bad person, just greedy, weak, and guided by ambition. Now he was forced to learn to fight again. She reflected, put on instrumental music to calm her mind. Too many things had happened. At least life seemed to be stabilizing. The next day, she went to the company and signed the official investment in the real estate project after evaluating it. Many colleagues were surprised, as the project was backed by a small marketing team, but she had her own vision. A close partner asked her, "Are you sure? They seem new to this." She replied, "Yes, there is risk, but also a great opportunity. Besides, the person in charge of marketing has talent. Someone who, despite having no money, continues using their intelligence to work is trustworthy." She didn't explicitly say Alexander was behind the project, just smiled bitterly. Actually, she wanted to give him a way out. She owed it to him whether he acknowledged it or not. It was like returning the last shred of faith to her former marriage. If they did well, everyone would win. If not, she wouldn't lose much either, as the project was still viable. The following week, Alexander and Chloe received the news that the project had been funded. They were very happy, not knowing the principal shareholder who had made the decision was Rachel. Both launched into execution. Alexander showed enthusiasm discussing technical aspects with the investing company's staff, gradually regaining his confidence. Chloe also worked hard. Although she understood her position was now insignificant, having a job was good. Occasionally, she looked at Alexander with a strange emotion. She had once used him and now felt something akin to affection or maybe just gratitude. He, for his part, remained distant. After all, he didn't want to repeat his mistakes. One day, Alexander went to the partner company to sign the first phase contract. He froze seeing the name on the plaque of the chairwoman of the board, Rachel. Now he understood she was the one who had approved the investment. He felt a mix of warmth and shame. Life was strange. Once they were husband and wife, and now he had to present projects to her for approval. He entered the meeting room and saw Rachel sitting in the main chair surrounded by her advisory council. She wore a white suit, hair tied back, a calm look. He, nervous, presented his report. She listened, didn't listen, exchanging brief comments. Her partners, after listening, agreed to sign. At the end of the meeting, he closed his folder and got up. He saw she was also preparing to leave. His heart trembled. He wanted to tell her, "Thanks for trusting me," but with so many people around he kept quiet. After the signing, Alexander returned with his mind in the clouds. He understood that was the last hand she extended to him in secret. If he didn't value it, there would be no more chances. Meanwhile, Rachel, upon finishing, went to the parking lot, leaned back in the seat, and closed her eyes. She remembered the moment Alexander signed with a trembling hand, his face with a few more wrinkles. He had aged a lot. She felt no satisfaction, only a shred of bitterness. All debts were paid. She had given him a chance to start over, and he no longer bothered her. Everyone had matured through the breakup. In the afternoon, she left the office early and went to her favorite coffee shop. She chose a corner by the window and ordered a hot cappuccino. Watching the bustle of cars, she took a sip and reflected. Since separating from her former in-laws, she had traveled a long road. Once she thought her life would depend on her marriage. Now she saw a woman could do much more and knew how to get up. She thought she would go even further. She didn't need an unfaithful man. Whatever the future, she trusted her ability to face it. When she was about to leave, she received a message from Eleanor, informing her she had just returned from a checkup and the doctor told her her blood pressure was stable. Rachel smiled and replied briefly, "I'm glad." At night in her apartment, she sat on the bed and closed her laptop. Suddenly she realized she no longer felt overwhelmed thinking about the past. Her mind was as light as mist. All pain, torment, and resentment had dissipated. It was enough. From now on, her life was decided by her. She could choose to be alone or find someone who deserved her without ties. The wind blew through the window. She closed her eyes and exhaled relieved. Outside, the city was still noisy, but in her heart reigned calm. The storms had passed, leaving a clear sky, and she trusted that tomorrow the sun would shine again, warming those who had survived the tempest. She looked forward silently, knowing her journey was still long, but sure she would never return to the darkness of the past, where they trampled her without her daring to protest. Now only a strong, mature woman remained, ready to face any future challenge. Alexander organized his documents while looking out the window, where the sunset light slipped between tall buildings. In recent weeks, the real estate project had progressed favorably. He and Chloe had worked hard, getting more contracts than expected. Although the work was modest compared to his previous stagnation, he felt much more encouraged. That afternoon he received a message from Rachel. The company confirmed project sales had increased by 15%, and they should maintain the pace. A few words, but they warmed his heart. He knew it was she who was behind the investment, who had given him the chance to prove his worth, even if she didn't say it directly. He put away the phone, suppressing a slight smile. Before, a smile from her was enough to give him peace. Now everything was different. Chloe entered with a folder in her hand. Seeing him relaxed, she asked, "Shall we have dinner tonight, Alexander? I have a discount at a new Japanese restaurant. I wanted to treat you." Alexander, still looking at the computer, replied thoughtfully, "I'm busy. I have to get back soon to my mother. She's better, but needs company." Chloe, ashamed, said, "Well, another time then." Her voice sounded a bit sad. It seemed she was starting to feel something for him, but he didn't care. His life had already had enough storms. Now he just wanted to keep his job and take care of his mother. There was no room for complicated relationships. Since moving to the rental apartment, Eleanor's health had improved thanks to the medication. Both their lives revolved around worries about food, rent, and medicines. Every time Alexander collected a commission, he gave his mother some money with joy. Eleanor, seeing her son fight, didn't dare ask for more. She felt guilty for her mistakes, but didn't know how to fix it. One afternoon, Eleanor told Alexander, "Call Rachel. Tell her to come. I want to see her." He was surprised and asked why. Eleanor just said she wanted to give her a small gift as a token of affection. Alexander hesitated, but finally called her. Rachel's calm voice answered on the other end. "Do you need something?" He briefly explained his mother's wish. She remained silent for a few seconds and then replied, "Okay, I'll go this weekend." Her words, light as the wind, moved him. On the weekend, Rachel arrived at the apartment with a small gift in her hand. Alexander opened the door and invited her to enter politely. His heart beat strongly seeing her in a cream dress and hair tied back, needing little makeup. She radiated a confidence that left him amazed. Eleanor, seeing her, said with a trembling voice, "You came. Sit down, please. The house is small. Excuse us." She nodded and reassured her. "Don't worry. I'm fine here." Eleanor took out with effort a box of memories from a wooden wardrobe, opened it, and handed Rachel a stack of old photos, including their wedding and family photos. "I kept these photos thinking one day you and Alexander would need them. Now with this situation, I return them to you." Rachel took the photos and memories flooded her. A photo of her in her wedding dress smiling next to Alexander. One of Eleanor's birthday when newlywed her mother-in-law had caressed her head affectionately. She felt a pang of nostalgia. After all, it had been a happy time. Rachel put the photos away and sighed. "Thanks for keeping them. I thought you would have thrown them away." Eleanor shook her head. "No matter how angry I was with you, I never hated you that much. It was my blindness that let others intervene. I owe you many apologies." Her voice broke, her eyes moistened. Rachel put her hand on hers and comforted her. "Don't think about that. It's past." Eleanor wiped her tears and smiled sadly. "I don't dare ask you to return. I just hope you are happy in your way. I thank you for taking care of me in the hospital and with the medicines." Rachel smiled, not wanting to prolong the conversation. It was a small gesture. "Don't give it another thought." The room fell silent. Alexander, standing in the doorway, watched in silence. Seeing Rachel's back, he realized time had transformed her into another person, strong, determined as if no trace of the past remained. After a while, he said, "Thanks for coming. My mother is calmer." Rachel nodded and got up. "I'm leaving now. Take care, please." Eleanor followed her with her gaze. Before she left, she slipped a paper with the address of the old estate into her hand. "If you renovate or sell it, let me see it one last time. After all, it's a memory of my husband." Rachel took the paper in silence. She understood the house was now hers. She could do what she wanted with it. But her mother-in-law yearned to see it one last time. "I'll organize it," she said in a low voice. When she left, Eleanor leaned against the wall and sighed, feeling a weight lifted off her, but knowing she would never return to peaceful times. Alexander said nothing, just collected the photos in silence. That night, he sat with the old album turning the pages. A photo of Rachel smiling with her arm linked to his. He regretted it. "I should have taken care of you, valued you. What use is regret now?" The next morning, Alexander went to the real estate agency for a management meeting. The good news was that the first phase had been completed with sales doubling forecasts. Everyone praised the marketing team's effort. Alexander, as the initiator of the strategy, received praise. Sitting in the meeting room, he heard Rachel's representative announce they would inject more capital. Chloe beside him applauded and looked at him with joy. At the end of the meeting, Alexander received an envelope with a bonus. For the first time after so long, he held money he had earned himself, without depending on his wife's name or support. He felt overwhelmed. He wanted to see Rachel to thank her, but she wasn't there. The secretary informed him she was busy at the new branch. Rachel's life was also full of commitments. She focused on expanding the company and building a team. At noon, she met with a foreign investor. He was an attractive man who showed interest in her beyond business. During lunch, he asked discreetly, "May I know something more about your family, Rachel?" She smiled and dodged the question elegantly. "I prefer not to talk about my private life. I hope you understand." The partner nodded. She felt he had a special interest, but felt no connection. Her heart had frozen after her broken marriage, and she was in no hurry. That day, on the way to the office, she received a call from Chloe. Her voice sounded hesitant. "Sorry to bother, but could you come out to the company door to see me a moment? I promise it will be quick." Rachel was surprised, but accepted. She knew Chloe would have some problem. A few minutes later, Chloe appeared looking worried. She looked around as if fearing being seen. I know this is strange, but I'm being transferred to another state for a few weeks. I'm worried Alexander and his mother will be left alone. Could you? Could you stop by occasionally to see how they are and remind them to take their medicines? Rachel was surprised. Why me? Aren't you the one close to them? Chloe lowered her head. Yes, but I'm just a coworker. I don't live with them. Besides, his mother doesn't like me and I'm worried she'll exert herself too much. And Alexander is so busy making money he might neglect her. Rachel frowned. The situation was ironic. Chloe, who had destroyed her marriage, now asking her to take care of Alexander's mother. She hesitated a moment and then replied, "If they need it, I'll help them." "Don't worry," Chloe, excited, said with teary eyes. "You are generous. I hope Alexander and his mother are okay. I've done too much damage." With that, she left quickly, not daring to stay longer. Rachel felt uncomfortable, but didn't refuse. After all, she couldn't turn her back on a sick elderly person. At night, Rachel was in her apartment looking at an invitation for a college alumni reunion. She hadn't seen her old friends in a long time. Before, she was always busy supporting Alexander and had few opportunities to socialize. Now she was free, but also very busy. She sent a message to Mark, her lawyer friend. "This weekend, there is an alumni reunion. Are you going?" Mark replied instantly. "Of course. See you there to catch up. Prepare to tell some exciting story." Rachel laughed. Actually, what worried her most was talking about her divorce, since everyone knew she and Alexander had been the perfect couple in college. On the day of the reunion, she wore a simple dress and light makeup. Her friends seeing her were very happy and curious about her marriage. Many asked shyly, "And Alexander, how are you two?" She responded calmly, "We separated. Everyone has gone their own way." Everyone was surprised, but seeing her serene smile, they didn't dare ask more. Mark took her to a corner. "Truth is, people are quite surprised. In college, you and Alexander were the ideal couple." She shrugged. "Life changes and so do I. There's nothing to regret." They drank some wine, reminisced about old times, and laughed out loud. At the end of the night, some friends proposed going to karaoke. Rachel wanted to leave early, but Mark insisted. "Just a while. Now you're a businesswoman, always so serious. You don't know how to have fun anymore." She smiled and accepted. At karaoke, everyone sang. She took the microphone and sang a romantic ballad. Suddenly, she remembered past years. Her soft but feeling-filled voice made her friends listen in silence. Finishing the song, Mark applauded. "I remember you dedicated this song to Alexander. It still sounds just as good." She smiled to herself. Turns out back then she had put her emotions into that song. Now only a vague memory remained. At night she walked down a deserted street. The cold wind brushed her skin, and she felt a pang of melancholy, but quickly returned to reality. She took a taxi back to her apartment, lay in bed, and looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow she planned to visit Eleanor, since Chloe had insisted. She smiled slightly. It was strange. First they helped Alexander by investing in his project, and now she substituted Chloe in caring for his mother. But what could she do? Deep down she couldn't be indifferent. The next morning she prepared a fruit basket and went to Eleanor's apartment. Alexander wasn't there. He had gone out to see a client. Eleanor was happy. "You came? I was just thinking of you." Rachel smiled. "Chloe asked me to come see how you were." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "That girl worries about me now." "What things?" Rachel didn't comment. She took her blood pressure and reminded her to take the medicines. Eleanor, happy, asked about her work. "Are you very busy?" She nodded. "Quite, but I organize myself." They talked naturally, without the tension of before. In the end, when she was about to get up to leave, Eleanor took her hand. "Daughter, I only wish someday you can open your heart and find new happiness. Your story with Alexander ended. I don't dare ask you to return, but it hurts to see you alone." Rachel remained silent a moment and then smiled. "I know, I'll manage. Don't worry." Eleanor nodded, still looking guilty. "Thank you very much." Rachel smiled and grabbed her purse to get up. Leaving, she ran into Alexander, returning home. He was surprised. "You came to visit?" She nodded with a calm voice. "I came to see your mother." You should take her for a checkup soon? Don't let the situation drag on, he replied in a low voice. I'll remember. Thanks. Being so close in such a small space, Alexander perceived Rachel's subtle perfume, both familiar and strange. He wanted to say something else, but she left quickly, as if the barrier between them was insurmountable. Eleanor, looking through the crack of the door, saw her leave and sighed. After that day, Rachel's company organized a results presentation, inviting the press to record and present new products and projects. Rachel prepared a formal ceremony with the attendance of shareholders, directors, and guests. Alexander was also invited as a partner. Although a minor partner, he entered the lobby nervous seeing the luxury of the place. Company staff greeted him politely and guided him to the guest area. Inside, Rachel was busy talking to a group of businessmen. She wore a white business suit with a light-colored jacket, radiating confidence. The lights made her shine. Alexander, sitting next to other colleagues, listened to whispers about that woman who controlled the company's finances. He wondered silently if that was his ex-wife, a brilliant symbol he could never reach again. The ceremony began, and Rachel went on stage. Her speech was energetic. We are proud to present our achievements. She presented the plan, vision, and human values of the company. Alexander listened without taking his eyes off her. For a moment he felt his heart beat strongly like the first time, but then remembered the wound he himself had caused her, and the emotion faded. In the end, everyone dispersed for the party. Alexander hesitated whether to approach to greet her, fearing she wouldn't like it. Rachel approached him before he could react, extended her hand, and smiled. Congratulations, you've come further than you thought. He nervously shook her hand, his heart agitated, but she only nodded slightly and went to attend to other guests. Some patted him on the back, praising his progress. He forced a smile following Rachel's figure with his gaze, feeling clearly she was already very far away. That night he returned home thoughtful. Chloe sent him a message. How well you did. Today, many people looked at you with admiration. He read it, but didn't answer. Instead, he opened the photo album and looked at their wedding photo. Fate sure knew how to turn. Suddenly he thought if he should tell her everything or ask forgiveness, but discarded it. What right did he have? It was better to admire her silently as a partner. That night Rachel also arrived late. She took off the suit, removed her makeup, and looked in the mirror. Before she felt insecure, believing she wasn't good enough to measure up to Alexander. Now she had proven her worth. But family happiness was gone. She pressed her lips together, turned off the light, and got into bed. In the middle of the night, she received an email from her foreign partner praising the success of the ceremony. She smiled slightly, wrote a few lines of thanks, deleted them, and replaced them with a shorter sentence. She didn't want it misinterpreted as personal interest. She turned off the computer, buried her face in the pillow, and relaxed. Life went on and she sensed more changes were coming. The next day, a small setback occurred. The company account was temporarily blocked due to a bank technical problem, delaying payments for a project. Alexander worried, as he needed the money urgently to pay for construction materials. He spent the whole morning at the bank making calls. Finally, he risked calling Rachel, not knowing if she would answer, but she replied with her calm voice, "I'm aware of the situation. Wait for us to transfer a reserve fund so you can pay." He sighed, relieved, and thanked her. Just at that moment, the bank solved the problem and money flowed again. He felt saved. Early in the afternoon, the finance department informed him that Rachel's company had transferred the money on time, and the bank too. Alexander, encouraged, gathered his things to take to the site. He realized that even if Rachel's company had temporary problems, she always had a plan B, ensuring her partners weren't harmed. He understood better and better why she had been so successful. It wasn't just for the money, but for her vision and decision. At the end of the day, after checking the accounts, he received news that his mother had been hospitalized. Frightened, he took a taxi and ran to the hospital. In the hallway, Eleanor was on an emergency stretcher with an unstable heart due to strong emotion. "What happened, Mom?" he asked, anguished. She whispered, "I was going to buy fruit and slipped." My heart raced. He sweated worriedly. The doctor ordered her to stay for observation. Alexander, trembling, looked for his bank card. Luckily, now he had some money from his commissions. He paid the deposit. When the doctor left, he sat next to his mother, took her hand, and his eyes filled with tears. "Mom, don't scare me." While sitting, he saw Rachel appear. She entered with a bag of medicines and some toiletries. She looked at him and said, "Chloe alerted me. I came running." Alexander was surprised Chloe had alerted her, and with a choked voice thanked her. Rachel left a bottle of mouthwash, wet wipes, and fruit on the nightstand. Eleanor, with teary eyes, said, "Daughter, you helped me again." Rachel forced a smile, patted her shoulder. "Don't say that. Don't worry. Alexander and I are here." With that, she retired silently to a chair. Alexander didn't dare look at her, only lowered his head. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant. At night, Eleanor fell asleep, and Rachel got up. She whispered to Alexander, "Stay here with your mother. Tomorrow I'll come early to relieve you." Moved, he asked, "You don't mind?" She shook her head. "I only do what I must. Rest." With that, she left the room and walked down the long hallway. The sound of her heels echoed in the silence. Alexander followed her with his gaze until she disappeared. A hot tear rolled down his cheek. Although he knew all debts were paid, she remained compassionate. He understood that for all these years he owed her not only an apology, but also the days of peace she had dedicated to his family. That night he fell asleep in the chair, remembering his life with her. The 4 cold walls of the hospital room made him feel even lonelier. Perhaps all his life he would have to live with indelible remorse. In the distance, Rachel drove back home feeling melancholic. She hadn't forgotten the affection of the past, but no longer had the strength to go back. It was better to let things take their course. She wanted to take care of Eleanor to fulfill her filial duty. Nothing more. Eleanor was in the hospital for more than a week. Her health improved gradually, thanks to care. Rachel and Alexander took turns caring for her, and sometimes Chloe stopped by to leave them food, although Eleanor was distant with her. Occasionally, Alexander saw Rachel sitting by the bed peeling fruit silently for his mother. Eleanor looked at her former daughter-in-law with teary eyes. Seeing that scene, he got a lump in his throat. There was a time when his home was warm. Now they clung to that fragile bond in a hospital. The day Eleanor was discharged, the doctor recommended rest. Alexander took her back to the old apartment, immensely grateful to Rachel for having covered most of the expenses. Eleanor took his hand and said, "I don't want to bother you anymore, daughter, but we could go to the old house. Last time you said you were deciding whether to sell or keep it." Rachel understood she wanted to say goodbye to her old home. She reflected. She's still weak. She shouldn't make long trips. Eleanor insisted, "I'll go by car. Nothing will happen. I want to see that place one last time." Rachel couldn't refuse and agreed to organize it for the weekend. On the appointed day, Rachel went to pick them up in her car. Chloe also wanted to go, but Eleanor's cold gaze made her retreat. The car glided down the road under a clear sky. Inside reigned silence. 3 people, 3 moods. Eleanor, between expectation and fear, clutched the edge of her clothes. Alexander, in the passenger seat, glanced at Rachel sideways, but she was focused on the road with a distant expression. Finally, they stopped in front of the familiar iron gate. Since Rachel bought it, she had never lived there. Only a caretaker handled cleaning and the garden. The estate retained its classic style with the porch trees leafy. Eleanor, supported by her son, got out of the car and looked at the gate with peeling paint. Tears sprang from her eyes. "Honey, I'm home, but this house is no longer ours." Rachel approached to help her into the patio. On the stone path, some flower bushes still remained with a few purple lilies. Eleanor, trembling, touched one of the flowers and memories invaded her. This place that was once full of laughter, where they celebrated holidays and birthdays, now felt empty. Rachel opened the main door. The interior smelled slightly of dampness. Most of the old furniture was still there, covered with sheets. Eleanor looked around, touched the wooden table where she used to drink tea, and burst into tears. "Here is where Chloe bragged about her fake pregnancy, where I said so many cruel things to you. I regret it." Alexander beside her was stunned. He looked at the sofa where Chloe had lain, where he had thrown the divorce papers at Rachel, and felt overwhelmed by guilt. Rachel, without reproaches, just said, "It's all over now, don't be sad." Eleanor took her to the kitchen. She touched the countertop. "You spent nights cooking, and I never thanked you. I even called you useless." Her voice trembled. "If I could go back, I wouldn't treat you like that." Rachel, worried, took her back to the living room to sit. After a while, Eleanor wanted to go up to see the old bedroom. "Mom, you're weak. Don't go up the stairs," Alexander said, but she insisted. "I have to see it one more time." Rachel, seeing her, said, "I'll help her." They climbed slowly. The wooden steps creaked. On the second floor, light entered through an open window, illuminating an old curtain. Eleanor held onto the railing, tired, but determined. Arriving at the master bedroom, she stopped with a trembling hand. She remembered this had been Alexander and Rachel's bridal room, full of sweet memories. Now the door was locked. Rachel opened it. The interior was covered by a thin layer of dust. Alexander, behind, looked silently at the corner of the old bed where he and Rachel had shared so many nights. He felt choked by emotion. Eleanor asked in a low voice, "Do you plan to renovate or sell it?" Rachel answered softly, "I think I'll sell it. I don't want to keep too many painful memories." Eleanor nodded with teary eyes. "Yes, sell it soon. Don't let memories torment you." With that, she turned and took Rachel's hand. "If you sell it, ask for a good price. This house is worth a lot. Don't let them cheat you. I know you're good at negotiating, but I wanted to tell you." Her voice was hoarse, full of bitterness. Rachel forced a smile. "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Eleanor placed her hand on the bedroom door, closed her eyes a few seconds as if saying goodbye, and then went down. Alexander, behind her, felt his heart shrinking. A house that seemed so solid. Now it was a silent witness of the past. It was hard to breathe. Memories choked him. He wished he had never been wrong. Finally, they went out to the garden. "When you decide to sell it, I won't interfere. Do what you have to do," said Eleanor. Rachel nodded and accompanied her to the car. Alexander remained silent with teary eyes. When the car started, Eleanor looked out the window. Tears ran down her face. Rachel drove in silence, respecting her emotions. Alexander lowered his head with a heavy heart. Back, Eleanor was almost exhausted. She fell asleep. Arriving at the apartment, Alexander carried her. Rachel waited and told him, "Let her rest. Don't let her get too excited. If anything happens, call me." Alexander looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. When she turned around, he blurted out, "Rachel," she stopped. "When you sell the house, you'll have a lot of money. You can think about your own happiness. You deserve it." She stood a moment in silence and then smiled. "I'll think about it. Take care of your mother, don't worry about other things." She turned around and went down the stairs with her usual calm. The following days, work absorbed Rachel. They were about to open a new branch and needed to hire staff. She had constant meetings. Sometimes her colleagues joked, "Boss so pretty and capable, how come no one picks her up?" She just smiled. All her emotions seemed to have frozen. Still, she gave herself the chance to meet new people. Sometimes she dined with a Chinese partner or chatted briefly with a young investor, but no one made her want to take a further step. One afternoon, she went to the bank to manage the mortgage of the old estate preparing for the sale. Casually, she met her friend Mark. "Are you really selling the house?" he asked. "Yes. I don't want to keep it. It's a burden of memories." Mark nodded. "You do well, clean slate. And do you plan to buy another? Maybe a bigger apartment near the office?" Mark joked, "Preparing to receive a new husband?" She smiled without answering. After the bank, she received a message from Alexander. "My mother is better. She keeps talking about you. She's ready for you to sell the house. Hope everything goes well." She looked at the screen and frowned. She remembered the times he had flattered her in the past. Now his words only showed respect without daring to approach. She wrote, "Thanks, I'll handle it. Hope your mother gets better." She turned off the phone and drove home. At night, standing on the balcony, the wind blew cold. She remembered her journey from submissive wife to independent woman. She closed her eyes and exhaled. The marriage door had closed, but her career door had opened. Suddenly, she wanted to escape memories, start a new life for real. The next day, she signed a deposit contract with a real estate agency. They were very interested in the estate's location. They agreed on everything and met to sign at the notary in a few days. She returned to the office just in time for a strategy meeting. Throughout the meeting, she concentrated on her presentation without letting personal matters distract her. Finishing, Alexander waited for her in the lobby. He handed her a thin envelope. "This is the money I want to return to you. You helped my mother with the hospital last time. I have a little extra money. I hope you accept it." She, surprised, looked at him. She understood he wanted to keep his pride. She didn't refuse. "Okay, thanks." He stood still, hesitating. "Sorry for making you spend so much on my mother. Only now can I return it to you." She put the envelope in her purse and nodded. "You're making an effort, that's good." His hunched posture showed his regret. She said goodbye and left feeling a little lighter because he had learned to be independent. Perhaps this was the final point of her old obligations. On the weekend, she went to the notary to meet with the estate buyers. Only the last signature was missing. They discussed for a while. When the papers were ready, her phone rang. It was Eleanor with a desperate voice. "Daughter, haven't you sold the house yet?" "Don't sign yet. I want to see it one more time," Rachel replied. "Mom, you already saw it the other day." Eleanor pleaded. "I know, but I haven't finished yet. I've been hiding something from you. I wanted to put a photo of your father-in-law for the last time in the house." Rachel hesitated, but finally told the buyers she would postpone the signing a few days, as her former family needed to do some paperwork. The buyers respected it. She drove to pick up Eleanor and took her to buy flowers. Alexander also went with them. In the car, they didn't talk much. They stopped at the house. For the last time in the empty living room, Eleanor stood before the grand fireplace where her late husband's oil portrait hung. There were no dramatics, just the heavy silence of a lost legacy. She touched the frame with a trembling hand. "I failed you, Richard," she whispered to the painting. "I traded a loyal daughter-in-law for a lie, and now we've lost the house you built." She turned to Rachel, her eyes red but dry. "It's done. The movers have taken the last boxes. The keys are on the counter. Honey, I've failed. I couldn't keep the house or a good daughter-in-law, but she still helps me. If you hear me, protect her." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She bowed. Afterward, Eleanor got up, wiping her tears. "It's done. Sell it, daughter." She turned to Rachel with a sad voice. "Don't feel guilty. I myself decided to let go." Rachel nodded softly. "I also want to close this chapter." Eleanor, exhausted, asked Alexander to help her out. Passing by Rachel, she stopped, touched her shoulder. "Thank you, daughter. I hope you are happy." Rachel bowed her head with a choked voice. "Thank you, Mom. Take care." Eleanor walked slowly out of the estate, leaving a sigh on the threshold. Alexander helped her walk, looking at Rachel one last time. She smiled slightly by way of goodbye. For a moment, in the empty house, the wind blew through the window, moving an old curtain. Rachel walked out the door with a heavy but calm heart. She knew the next day she would sell the house, putting an end to her memories. Driving back, she drove down a familiar street. The afternoon fell silently. At an intersection, she stopped and rolled down the window. The scent of night-blooming jasmine brought back memories. She smiled sadly, rolled up the window, and continued driving, determined not to think about it anymore. The next morning, she officially signed the sale. The happy buyers transferred the money, praising her frankness and transparency. She left the notary with the confirmation documents. Outside the door, Alexander waited silently. She didn't know how long he had been there. Seeing her, he approached. "You finished?" She nodded, showing the papers. "I sold it. Now you can rest easy. Your mother no longer has any debt with that house." He smiled sadly. "Thank you. It's really over." She smiled. "Yes, it's really over." In her smile there was melancholy, but both knew they couldn't go back. Between them was the past. He tried to say something else, but she was already in her car, starting the engine. Through the rearview mirror, she saw him standing silently with hands down. She whispered, "Goodbye, Alexander." the car blended with traffic, taking her away. In her seat, she received a notification from the bank. The money from the house sale had arrived. Her eyes filled with tears, but she felt incredibly light. From now on, there would be no more ties or debts with the past. At night, alone in her apartment, she packed. She had just bought another bigger and better located apartment. She planned to move there and build a new living space. While packing, she received a message from Eleanor. "I wish you much luck. Thank you." She sent a smiley emoji and turned off the phone. For the first time, she felt she had really closed all wounds. A new apartment awaited her, a career awaited her, a future awaited her. Late at night, standing by the window, she contemplated the illuminated city. Remembering the road traveled, she had no more tears. All the pain had turned into motivation, forging her into the strong woman she was now. She sighed, relieved, feeling a rarely experienced freedom. Tomorrow she would move, continue her work, continue her journey without looking back at the ruins of the past. One stage ended, another door opened. She trusted she would be master of her destiny, that she would find the happiness she deserved. Because only when one has the courage to let go of the past can one be truly free.